The moment Caleb Hunter's face flashed across every news channel in America, he knew his carefully hidden past was about to destroy everything he'd built. The rescue that made him a hero would also make him a target. Because 10 years ago, Caleb didn't just walk away from his former life as a covert operative. He ran with secrets that powerful men would kill to keep buried. And now, they knew exactly where to find him. Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. You won't believe what happens next. The morning of June 14th started like any other Tuesday for Caleb Hunter. The sun crept over the pine-studded hills surrounding Clearwater Lake, casting long golden fingers across the water's glassy surface. The air smelled of wet earth and wild sage, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called out its haunting cry. It was the kind of perfect stillness that made you forget the world outside could be cruel. Caleb stood on the rocky shore, watching his 8-year-old son, Jamie, struggle with his fishing rod. The boy's tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, his small hands gripping the cork handle with the fierce determination only children possess. "Dad, I think I'm doing it wrong," Jamie said, his voice carrying that edge of frustration that came right before tears. Caleb waded through the shallow water, his worn boots squelching in the mud. He knelt beside his son, placing his larger, calloused hands over Jamie's smaller ones. "You're doing fine, buddy. Just remember, it's not about forcing it. It's about patience. Feel the line. Let the lake tell you when it's ready." Jamie looked up at him with those wide hazel eyes, his mother's eyes. The resemblance still caught Caleb off guard sometimes, even after 3 years. Sarah had died giving birth to their second child, a daughter who'd lived only 4 hours. The double loss had hollowed him out, left him a shell of the man he'd once been. But Jamie had saved him. Needing to be strong for his son had given Caleb a reason to wake up every morning. "Like this?" Jamie asked, adjusting his grip. "Exactly like that. Now cast. Easy does it." The boy swung the rod back and then forward. The line sailed out over the water, the red and white bobber landing with a satisfying plop about 20 feet from shore. Jamie's face lit up with pride. "I did it!" "You sure did. Now we wait." They stood together in comfortable silence, father and son, the kind of silence that speaks of trust and love deeper than words. Caleb had chosen this place deliberately. Clearwater Lake was 40 miles from the nearest town, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Montana that tourists rarely discovered. It was remote, safe, anonymous. Exactly what he needed. For 10 years, Caleb had been running. Not physically, he'd stopped moving from town to town after Jamie was born, but emotionally, psychologically. He'd built a new life, a quiet life. He worked as a carpenter, fixing porches and building decks for the scattered homesteads around the county. He attended Jamie's school events. He volunteered at the community center. He was by all appearances exactly what he claimed to be, a widowed single father doing his best. Nobody knew about Aegis Group. Nobody knew about the operations in Syria, Yemen, Somalia. Nobody knew about the things he'd done under orders from men whose names never appeared on any official documents. And nobody knew about the encrypted files he'd stolen on his way out. Insurance, he'd called it then. Evidence of war crimes, illegal arms deals, and assassinations that violated every international law on the books. For 10 years, that insurance had sat untouched on a thumb drive buried in a waterproof case beneath the floorboards of his bedroom closet. And for 10 years, Caleb had told himself that Gareth Voss, his former handler and the man who'd recruited him straight out of Army Special Forces, had either forgotten about him or decided he wasn't worth the trouble of hunting down. He should have known better. The sound hit them before they saw it, a high-pitched whine that didn't belong in nature, growing rapidly louder. Caleb's instincts, honed by years of combat and covert work, kicked in immediately. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the sky. "Dad, what's that noise?" "Stay here," Caleb ordered, his voice sharp enough to freeze Jamie in place. The private jet came screaming over the ridge to the east, trailing black smoke from one engine. It was a Gulfstream G650, Caleb's mind supplied automatically. He'd been on enough of them during his Aegis days to recognize the profile, but this one was in trouble. Serious trouble. The plane wobbled violently, nose dipping, one wing dropping lower than the other. The pilot was fighting for control, but even from the ground, Caleb could tell it was a losing battle. The jet was coming down. and it was coming down fast. "Oh, God," Caleb whispered. The Gulf Stream clipped the top of a tall pine, the impact shearing off part of the wing. The plane spun, and for one horrible moment seemed to hang suspended in midair, defying physics and gravity. Then it dropped like a stone. The impact with Clearwater Lake sent up a geyser of water 50 feet high. The sound was deafening, a metallic crunch that echoed off the surrounding hills. Caleb felt the vibration through his boots, through his bones. "Daddy!" Jamie screamed. The plane hit tail first, the initial impact compressing the fuselage like an accordion. Then it tipped forward, the nose plunging beneath the surface. Water rushed through the shattered cockpit windows into the cabin, dragging the multi-million-dollar aircraft down into the deep. Caleb didn't think. There was no time for thought. His body moved on trained instinct, muscle memory from hundreds of crisis scenarios kicking in automatically. "Jamie, run to the truck. Call 911. Tell them a plane crashed into Clearwater Lake. Go now!" To his credit, the boy didn't freeze. He dropped his fishing rod and sprinted toward the pickup parked 30 yards away on the dirt access road. Caleb was already moving. He kicked off his boots, shedding his heavy flannel shirt as he ran. The water was cold, shockingly cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountain peaks, but he barely felt it. His powerful strokes ate up the distance between the shore and the crash site. The jet was sinking fast. Already, the tail section had disappeared beneath the surface, and water was pouring through the compromised fuselage, pulling it down into the murky depths. Caleb could see movement in the cockpit. At least one person still alive, struggling against their seatbelt. He reached the plane just as the nose began to slip under. Through the spiderwebbed glass of the cockpit, he could see her clearly now, a woman, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair matted with blood. She was conscious but disoriented, her hands fumbling uselessly at the belt buckle. Behind her, in the passenger cabin, he glimpsed two more figures, but they weren't moving. The pilot's seat was empty, either ejected, unlikely in a civilian aircraft, or thrown from the plane during the initial impact. Caleb sucked in a huge breath and dove. The water was even colder beneath the surface, a shocking embrace that tried to squeeze the air from his lungs. He forced himself to ignore it, focusing on the sinking jet. The current created by the descending aircraft tried to pull him down with it, but years of training in water survival kicked in. He angled his body, using the current rather than fighting it, and swam directly toward the shattered cockpit window. His lungs were already burning. In cold water, you had maybe 60 seconds of useful consciousness before hypothermia started to set in. Less if you were exerting yourself. He had to be fast. The woman saw him coming. Her eyes went wide. Brown eyes, he noted distantly, filled with terror and fading hope. She was still fighting the seatbelt, but her movements were becoming weaker, more sluggish. Shock and cold water were shutting her body down. Caleb grabbed the frame of the broken window and pulled himself into the cockpit. Jagged glass tore at his forearms, and he felt the hot sting of his own blood mixing with the frigid water. But he didn't slow down. The jet was nearly vertical now, nose pointing toward the lakebed 80 feet below. In seconds, it would be too deep to reach. He reached across the woman's body and found the seatbelt buckle. It was jammed. The impact had warped the metal mechanism. Caleb's vision was starting to narrow, his lungs screaming for air. He pulled the diving knife from his belt. Old habits died hard. He still carried one everywhere, and sawed through the heavy nylon webbing. The belt parted. The woman started to float up, but her leg was trapped beneath the collapsed instrument panel. Caleb grabbed her around the waist with one arm and braced his feet against the pilot's seat. He pulled. Nothing. He pulled harder, feeling something in his lower back protest. Still nothing. The woman's hands clutched at his shoulders, her grip weak but desperate. Her mouth was open, releasing the last of her air in a stream of silvery bubbles. Caleb adjusted his grip, planted his feet more firmly, and pulled with everything he had. He felt something give. Not her leg, thank God, but the crumpled metal pinning it. The woman came free so suddenly that they both tumbled backward through the cockpit door into the flooding passenger cabin. His vision was almost gone now, reduced to a narrow tunnel. His body was demanding, screaming, begging for him to breathe. The autonomic urge to gasp was almost overwhelming. But Caleb Hunter had spent years learning to ignore his body's demands. He'd gone 72 hours without sleep in Afghanistan. He'd marched 20 miles on a broken ankle in Somalia. He'd been waterboarded during resistance training and refused to break. He could do this. With the woman clamped firmly against his side, Caleb kicked off from the sinking jet. His powerful legs drove them upward through the dark water. The surface seemed impossibly far away, a dim brightness that might have been 100 feet overhead, or might have been a dying hallucination. His chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Black spots danced across his vision. His body began to convulse, trying to force him to breathe regardless of the consequences. Not yet, he told himself. Not yet. Jamie needs you. This woman needs you. Not yet. His head broke the surface. Caleb gasped, sucking in air that burned his throat and lungs like fire. The woman in his arms wasn't breathing. Her lips were blue, her face slack. He rolled her onto her back and began swimming toward shore, keeping her face above water. "Daddy?" Jamie was standing at the water's edge, jumping up and down and waving his arms. Behind him, Caleb could see his pickup truck, the driver's door standing open. Good boy. Smart boy. The swim back to shore seemed to take forever. Caleb's arms felt like lead, and the cold was really starting to affect him now. Shivers racked his body. But he kept swimming, one stroke at a time, refusing to stop, refusing to fail. Finally, his feet touched bottom. He stood, lifting the woman in his arms, and staggered toward the shore. Jamie rushed into the shallow water to meet him. "Is she dead?" the boy asked, his voice small and frightened. "Not if I can help it." Caleb laid the woman on the rocky beach and immediately began CPR. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. He could feel her ribs flexing beneath his palms, dangerously close to breaking, but drowning victims needed aggressive treatment. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, don't you dare give up on me." More compressions, more breaths. Water trickled from the corner of her mouth. Her skin was like ice beneath his hands. "Come on!" The woman convulsed. Water erupted from her mouth and nose as her body violently rejected the lake she'd inhaled. She rolled onto her side, coughing and retching, gasping for air between spasms. "That's it," Caleb encouraged, supporting her shoulders. "Get it all out. You're okay. You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak croak. "Don't try to talk," Caleb said. "You're in shock. You were in a plane crash. I got you out. Help is coming." As if on cue, he heard the distant wail of sirens. Jamie must have gotten through to 911. Thank God for small-town emergency services. In a bigger city, they'd still be trying to figure out which lake. The woman's hand reached up and grabbed Caleb's wrist. Her grip was weak but insistent. She pulled him closer, her lips moving. "The others," she whispered. "The pilot, my assistant." Caleb shook his head grimly. "The plane went down too fast, I'm sorry." Her eyes filled with tears. Whether from grief or shock or just the physical trauma, he couldn't tell. Probably all three. "You saved me," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That's all the reason anyone needs." She studied his face for a long moment, her brown eyes oddly intense despite the shock and pain. "What's your name?" Caleb hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to lie, to give a fake name, to avoid any kind of documentation or record. But there were sirens coming. There were witnesses. Jamie had probably seen him pull her from the water, and the crash had been massive, spectacular. There was no way this wasn't going to be investigated, documented, reported. The careful anonymity he'd built over 10 years was about to crumble whether he liked it or not. "Caleb," he finally said. "Caleb Hunter." "Evelyn," she replied. "Evelyn Cross." The name meant nothing to him. She was just a woman he'd pulled from a sinking plane, a person who'd needed help. It would be almost 24 hours before he learned that Evelyn Cross was one of the most powerful CEOs in America, that her company, Cross Industries, was a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with holdings in tech, defense, and pharmaceuticals. And it would be another 12 hours after that before the news coverage made him a household name. Before Gareth Voss saw his face on CNN, before the past he'd buried came roaring back to destroy the life he'd built. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of emergency responders, questions, and controlled chaos. The first ambulance arrived 16 minutes after the crash. Paramedics swarmed Evelyn, checking her vitals, wrapping her in thermal blankets, starting an IV line. She was coherent enough to answer basic questions, but kept slipping in and out of lucidity. A combination of shock, hypothermia, and what was probably a concussion from the head wound that was still bleeding sluggishly despite the field dressing the paramedics applied. A second ambulance checked out Caleb. He tried to wave them off. He'd been through worse in half a dozen war zones, but they insisted. His body temperature was dangerously low, down to 94 degrees Fahrenheit. They wrapped him in blankets and gave him hot sweet tea while a young paramedic with earnest eyes checked him for injuries. "Sir, you have some pretty serious lacerations on your forearms," the paramedic said, examining the cuts from the cockpit glass. "These are going to need stitches." "Later," Caleb said. "My son. Where's my son?" "Right here, Dad." Jamie pushed through the crowd of emergency workers. One of the sheriff's deputies had been keeping an eye on him, making sure he stayed clear of the frantic rescue operations. The boy threw himself into Caleb's arms. "You scared me," Jamie said, his voice muffled against Caleb's chest. "I'm sorry, buddy. But I'm okay. We're both okay. You jumped in after her. You went underwater and didn't come back for so long. I thought—" The boy couldn't finish the sentence. Caleb held him tighter. "Hey, look at me." He waited until Jamie met his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise. It takes more than a little cold water to stop your old man." The sheriff arrived in a mud-splattered SUV, followed by fire trucks and a dive team. Sheriff Tom Hendricks was a grizzled man in his late 50s, with a weather-beaten face and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. He'd been law enforcement in this county for 30 years, and had the calm, competent air of someone who'd seen just about everything. He walked straight to Caleb. "You the one who pulled her out?" Hendricks asked without preamble. "Yes, sir." The sheriff studied him for a moment. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've seen in 3 decades of this job. Probably both. You know you could have died? Cold water shock, drowning, getting trapped in the wreckage. Hell, that plane could have had a fuel leak and exploded while you were inside it." "I didn't really have time to think about it," Caleb said honestly. "I just reacted." Hendricks nodded slowly, something like respect crossing his weathered features. "I'm going to need a statement from you. Not right now. You need to get warmed up and looked after properly. But soon. There's going to be an NTSB investigation, probably FAA, maybe FBI, depending on what they find in the wreckage. This kind of thing, with a plane like that?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What kind of plane was it?" Caleb asked, though he already knew. "Gulfstream G650. That's about $15–20 million worth of aircraft at the bottom of the lake. And the woman you pulled out? The paramedics found ID in her jacket. That's Evelyn Cross." The name still meant nothing to Caleb, and it must have shown on his face. Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "You don't follow business news, do you?" "Not really. Cross Industries, Fortune 500 company. She's worth about $8 billion, give or take." The sheriff let out a low whistle. "You just saved one of the richest women in America. I guarantee you this is going to be national news by tonight." A cold feeling settled into Caleb's stomach. "National news," he repeated faintly. "Oh yeah, hero saves billionaire CEO from plane crash? The media is going to eat this up with a spoon. You'll probably be on Good Morning America by Friday." Hendricks clapped him on the shoulder. "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame, son. You earned it." The sheriff moved off to coordinate with the dive team, who were already suiting up to search for the pilot and the other passenger. Caleb knew they wouldn't find anyone alive. The cabin had been flooding too fast, and those 2 people hadn't been moving when he'd glimpsed them through the cockpit door. National news. The words echoed in Caleb's head like a death knell. His face would be on television, in newspapers, all over the internet, everywhere, and Gareth Voss would see it. "Mr. Hunter?" Caleb turned to find a young woman with a camera and a press credential hanging around her neck. Behind her, a man wielded a professional video camera, already filming. "Mr. Hunter, I'm Dana Mills from KRTV News. Can I ask you a few questions about the rescue? Our viewers would love to hear how you saved Ms. Cross." "No comment," Caleb said automatically. "Sir, you're a hero. People deserve to know—" "I said no comment." His voice was harder now, edged with the command presence he'd learned in the army. The reporter took a step back, startled by the sudden steel in his tone. But she didn't leave, and more reporters were arriving, drawn by scanner traffic and the spectacular nature of the crash. Caleb could see news vans pulling up along the access road, could see cameras pointing in his direction. The trap was closing. "Come on, Jamie," he said, scooping up his son. "We're leaving." "But Dad, the sheriff said—" "The sheriff knows where to find me." Caleb carried Jamie to the pickup truck, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters. He buckled his son into the passenger seat, climbed behind the wheel, and drove away from Clearwater Lake without looking back. In the rearview mirror, he could see the circus growing, more emergency vehicles, more news crews, more people drawn by the spectacle of tragedy and heroism. By tomorrow, the lake would probably be swarming with them, and by tomorrow, his face would be everywhere. 10 years, Caleb thought as he navigated the dirt road back toward town. 10 years of careful invisibility gone in 30 seconds of national television. "Dad?" Jamie's voice was small. "Are you mad at me?" Caleb glanced over at his son, surprised. "What? No, buddy, of course not. Why would I be mad at you?" "Because I told them your name. When the 911 lady asked who was there, I told her my name and your name. And then the police asked me lots of questions, and I told them everything because you always say to tell the truth to police officers and teachers. But now you seem upset and—" "Jamie." Caleb reached over and ruffled his son's hair, cutting off the anxious ramble. "You did exactly the right thing. You called for help. You stayed safe. You told the truth. I'm proud of you." "Then why are we leaving?" How could he possibly explain? How could he tell an 8-year-old that his father had a past full of dark deeds and dangerous men? That the simple act of heroism Jamie had witnessed might bring violence down on their quiet life? "Sometimes," Caleb said carefully, "being in the news and having lots of attention can make life complicated. I just like our quiet life the way it is. That's all." Jamie seemed to accept this explanation, or at least decided not to push. He turned his attention to the window, watching the pine forests roll past. Caleb drove in silence, his mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe Voss wouldn't see the news coverage. Maybe, even if he did, he'd decided that a decade was long enough, that the files were worthless now, that leaving Caleb alone was less trouble than coming after him. Maybe. But Caleb didn't believe in maybes anymore. He'd spent too many years in a world where paranoia kept you alive and optimism got you killed. They reached their house 40 minutes later, a modest 2-bedroom cabin on 3 acres of wooded land, 10 miles outside the small town of Whitefish, Montana. It was private, defensible, with good sightlines in all directions. Caleb had chosen it for exactly those reasons, though he'd told the realtor he just wanted peace and quiet for him and his son. He parked the truck and sat for a moment, staring at the house he'd turned into a home. The flower boxes Sarah had picked out before she died, the tire swing hanging from the big oak tree in the front yard, Jamie's bike lying on its side near the porch steps, abandoned mid-adventure as only a child's bike could be. Normal life. Safe life. The life he'd fought so hard to build. "Dad, can we still have pizza for dinner?" Caleb smiled despite his dark thoughts. Children had a way of keeping you grounded in the immediate. "Yeah, buddy. Pizza sounds perfect." They went inside and Caleb immediately checked the house, a habit he'd never quite broken. Windows locked, doors secure, no signs of disturbance. The small LED light on his security system glowed green, all clear. He started the oven heating for frozen pizzas while Jamie bounded off to his room to play. For a few minutes, Caleb let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be fine. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Caleb stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Hello? Mr. Hunter, this is Rebecca Chan from the Associated Press. I'm writing a story about your heroic rescue of Evelyn Cross this morning. I was hoping you might answer a few questions." "How did you get this number?" "Public records, sir. I wanted to—" Caleb hung up. The phone immediately rang again. Different number. He didn't answer. A text message arrived. "Mr. Hunter, this is CNN. We'd love to have you on our morning show tomorrow to discuss the rescue. Can we arrange a car to pick you up?" Then another. ABC News would like to schedule an interview. And another. Fox News is prepared to offer compensation for an exclusive sit-down. Within 10 minutes, Caleb's phone had received 43 calls and 27 text messages. He turned it off and stood in his kitchen, feeling the walls closing in. It's already started, he thought, and it's only going to get worse. He walked to his bedroom, shut the door, and went to the closet. He moved aside the box of winter clothes on the floor and pried up the loose floorboard. The waterproof case was exactly where he'd left it 10 years ago, gathering dust in the darkness. Caleb opened it and stared at the thumb drive inside. Such a small thing. 4 inches of plastic and electronics. But the files contained within represented dozens of illegal operations, hundreds of deaths, millions of dollars in arms deals that violated international sanctions, and proof that Gareth Voss had ordered all of it. "Daddy?" Caleb almost jumped. He snapped the case shut and slid it back under the floorboard, replacing the board and the box in one smooth motion. When he turned, Jamie was standing in the doorway, his Spider-Man action figure clutched in one hand. "Hey, champ, pizza's almost ready. Are you okay? You look sad." Children saw too much. Caleb forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking about the lady from the plane, hoping she's okay." "She is okay. You saved her." "Yeah, I guess I did." They ate pizza together at the small dining room table, Jamie chattering about his plans to become a lifeguard when he grew up, maybe even a Coast Guard rescue swimmer. Caleb listened and made appropriate responses, but his mind was elsewhere, running through options. He could run, pack up Jamie and drive through the night, disappear into Canada or Mexico, create new identities, start fresh somewhere else. He'd done it before. But Jamie was in school now. He had friends, a life, stability. Running would traumatize the boy, and Caleb had sworn he'd give his son something he'd never had, a normal childhood. He could call the FBI, turn over the files, ask for witness protection, but that meant reopening investigations that had been closed for years. It meant testifying, exposing himself, turning Jamie's life completely upside down. Or he could do nothing, wait and see if his fears were justified, hope that maybe, against all odds, Voss would let sleeping dogs lie. That night, after Jamie was in bed and the house was quiet, Caleb sat on his porch with a beer he didn't drink and watched the tree line. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. The wind whispered through the pines. It was peaceful. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that somewhere out there in the darkness, something malevolent was drawing closer with each passing hour. He went inside, locked all the doors and windows, and set the security alarm. Then he retrieved his old Sig Sauer P226 from the lockbox in his closet, a souvenir from his army days that he'd kept against all better judgment. He checked the magazine, chambered around, and set the weapon on his nightstand. Just in case. Caleb lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying the crash, the rescue, the look in Evelyn Cross's eyes when he'd pulled her from the water. He wondered how she was doing, whether she was in some hospital right now, surrounded by the best doctors money could buy. He wondered if saving her life would end up costing him his own. Somewhere around 3 a.m, exhaustion finally claimed him. He fell into a fitful sleep full of dark dreams, planes falling from the sky, drowning in black water, Jamie calling for him from somewhere he couldn't reach. And Gareth Voss, smiling his cold smile, saying, "Did you really think you could just walk away, Caleb? Did you really think I'd forget?" Caleb woke with a start as dawn light crept through his bedroom window. For a moment, he lay still, trying to convince himself that everything was fine, that his paranoia was just old habits dying hard. Then he heard Jamie scream from the living room, "Dad! Dad! Come quick!" Caleb was out of bed and running before his conscious mind caught up, the pistol in his hand on pure instinct. He burst into the living room, weapon raised, ready for whatever threat had. Jamie was standing in front of the television, pointing at the screen with wide eyes. Not scared, excited. "Dad, you're on TV! You're on TV!" Caleb lowered the gun and stared at the screen. CNN was running footage that must have been shot by someone with a smartphone yesterday. Grainy, shaky, but clear enough. It showed Caleb swimming toward the sinking plane, showed him disappearing beneath the surface, showed him emerging with Evelyn Cross in his arms. The chyron at the bottom read, "Hero Dad saves billionaire CEO from drowning." The dramatic rescue captured on camera yesterday afternoon, the news anchor was saying, shows single father Caleb Hunter, a carpenter from Whitefish, Montana, diving into Clearwater Lake to save Evelyn Cross, CEO of Cross Industries, after her private jet crashed during an apparent mechanical failure. Hunter, a former Army veteran, pulled Cross from the sinking aircraft with seconds to spare. Cross remains hospitalized in stable condition, while Hunter has declined all interviews. This incredible act of heroism has captivated the nation. The segment continued, but Caleb stopped listening. His face was right there, in high definition, for the entire world to see. They were showing his name, his hometown, his military background, information they must have pulled from public records in the past 12 hours. His phone, which he'd turned back on an hour ago, began ringing again. Email notifications started pinging. Social media mentions. People were tagging an Instagram account he'd set up years ago and barely used. The whole world was looking at Caleb Hunter, which meant Gareth Voss was looking at Caleb Hunter. "This is so cool," Jamie said. "Dad, you're famous. Can I tell my friends at school?" "Jamie," Caleb tried to figure out how to respond, but his throat felt tight. A car pulled into his driveway. Then another. Then a van. A news van, satellite dish on top. "Mr. Hunter?" A knock at the door. "Mr. Hunter, we'd love to ask you a few questions." They'd found his house. Of course they had. Public records, property tax documents, 10 minutes of research by any competent journalist. Caleb looked at his son's excited face, looked at the reporters gathering outside, looked at his own image frozen on the television screen, a moment of heroism preserved forever. And he knew, with sick certainty, that his life as Caleb Hunter, carpenter, single dad, anonymous small-town American, was over. The past was coming for him, and it would be here very soon. The reporters stayed camped outside Caleb's house for 3 days straight. News vans lined the quiet dirt road, satellite dishes pointing skyward like strange mechanical flowers. Journalists knocked on his door at all hours, left business cards wedged in his mailbox, even tried to interview his neighbors, though the closest family lived half a mile away and had nothing interesting to say. Caleb kept Jamie home from school. He called the principal and explained that the media attention was too intense right now, that he needed a few days for things to calm down. The principal, a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson who'd lost her own husband to cancer 5 years back, understood completely. "Take all the time you need," she said. "Jamie's a smart kid. He'll catch up on the work. You just worry about keeping your family safe from this circus." Safe. The word felt like a mockery. On the second day, a polished black sedan pulled up behind the news vans. A woman emerged, tall and professional in a charcoal gray suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She walked past the reporters with the confidence of someone used to ignoring questions, climbed Caleb's porch steps, and knocked on the door with a firm, no-nonsense rhythm. Caleb checked the security camera feed on his phone before answering. The woman stood with perfect posture, her hands clasped in front of her, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She looked directly at the camera and held up a business card so he could read it. Miranda Foster, executive assistant to Evelyn Cross, Cross Industries. Caleb opened the door a crack, keeping the chain engaged. "I'm not interested in interviews. I'm not a reporter, Mr. Hunter. Miss Cross sent me. May I come in? I promise this will only take a few minutes of your time." Behind her, the journalists had noticed the interaction. Cameras were swinging in their direction, and Caleb could hear the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters. He made a decision and unhooked the chain. "Make it quick." Miranda Foster stepped inside with a murmur of thanks. Caleb shut the door firmly behind her, cutting off the reporter's shouted questions. In the living room, Jamie was building an elaborate Lego fortress on the floor, but he looked up curiously at the visitor. "Hello," Jamie said politely, exactly as Caleb had taught him. Miranda smiled, and it transformed her serious face into something warmer. "Hello there. You must be Jamie. Your father is quite the hero." "I know, he was on TV and everything." "He certainly was." She turned back to Caleb, the professional mask sliding back into place. "Mr. Hunter, Ms. Cross wanted me to deliver this personally." She opened the portfolio and extracted a cream-colored envelope. expensive paper stock with his name written across the front in elegant script. She's still in the hospital. Observation for the concussion and some cracked ribs, but she insisted on writing to you immediately. Caleb took the envelope but didn't open it. She doesn't owe me anything. She disagrees. She asked me to convey her deepest gratitude for your actions. The doctors told her that without immediate intervention, she would have drowned. You saved her life, Mr. Hunter. That's not a small thing. I did what anyone would have done. No, Miranda said quietly. You did what you did. Most people would have called 911 and waited for help. You dove into freezing water and pulled her from a sinking aircraft at considerable risk to yourself. That's not what anyone would do. That's extraordinary. Caleb felt uncomfortable with the praise, with the weight of her gratitude. He gestured to the envelope. What's this then? A check? I don't want money for doing the right thing. It's not money. It's an invitation. Ms. Cross would like to meet with you in person once she's released from the hospital. She understands you value your privacy, especially given— Miranda glanced toward the window, where the silhouettes of reporters could be seen through the curtains. The current situation. She's prepared to arrange a private meeting, somewhere away from all this attention. I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested in— There's a second reason for my visit, Miranda interrupted, her tone shifting to something more serious. Ms. Cross wanted you to know that Cross Industries is prepared to assist you with this media situation. We have an excellent legal team and public relations department. If you'd like help managing the attention, or if any of these journalists are harassing you or your son, we can intervene. It was a generous offer. Almost too generous. Caleb's instincts, honed by years of working in a world where nothing came without strings attached, immediately went on alert. Why would she do that? Because you saved her life and she takes her debt seriously, and because she understands what it's like to have your privacy invaded by strangers with cameras. Miranda's expression softened slightly. Ms. Cross has been in the public eye for 20 years. She knows how intrusive it can be, how overwhelming. She wants to help, if you'll let her. Caleb looked at the envelope in his hand, feeling the weight of expensive paper, an unspoken obligation. He didn't want to owe anyone anything. Debts created connections, and connections created vulnerabilities. But the reporters outside weren't going anywhere, and if things went the way he feared they would, if Voss had seen the news coverage, if the past was already in motion, he might need powerful allies. Tell Ms. Cross I appreciate the offer, Caleb said carefully. I'll read her letter and think about it. Miranda nodded, seemingly satisfied with this non-answer. That's all she asks. My card is in the envelope, along with hers. If you need anything, legal assistance, security, help with the media, call either number, day or night. Ms. Cross considers herself in your debt, Mr. Hunter. That's not a position she takes lightly. After Miranda left, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on Cross Industries letterhead, the penmanship elegant but slightly shaky, probably from the hand injuries she'd sustained in the crash. Dear Mr. Hunter, I'm told that I owe you my life. The doctors have explained that I would have drowned within minutes if you hadn't pulled me from the aircraft. I have only fragmented memories of the crash itself, but I remember your face in the water, your hands pulling me free, your voice telling me I was safe. I've spent 20 years building a company, making deals, accumulating what the world calls success. None of it means anything compared to being alive to see another sunrise, to hear another song, to have another chance to make a difference in this world. You gave me that chance. I know you don't want attention or recognition. Miranda tells me you've declined all interview requests, that you're keeping your son home to avoid the media circus. I'm sorry that your act of kindness has brought such chaos into your life. If there's anything I can do to help you navigate this situation, please don't hesitate to ask. I would very much like to meet you properly, to thank you in person, and to know the man who didn't hesitate to risk his life for a stranger. With deepest gratitude, Evelyn Cross. Beneath her signature were 2 phone numbers, a mobile and an office line, and a handwritten postscript. If you prefer to keep your distance, I'll understand, but I hope you won't. Caleb folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. It was sincere, he could tell. No corporate polish or calculated manipulation, just genuine gratitude from someone who understood how close she'd come to dying. Under different circumstances, he might have taken her up on the offer to meet. He'd spent enough time around powerful people during his Aegis days to know that Evelyn Cross was probably interesting company, and God knew he could use some help managing the media situation. But these weren't different circumstances. These were dangerous circumstances, and the danger was about to get exponentially worse. Caleb could feel it coming, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. That night, after Jamie was asleep, Caleb sat in his home office, really just a converted closet with a desk and a computer, and did something he'd avoided for 10 years. He searched for information about Aegis Group. The results were frustratingly sparse. A few references to a private military contractor that had operated in various conflict zones. Some speculation on defense contractor forums about operations in Syria and Yemen. Nothing concrete. Nothing that would draw official attention. Gareth Voss's name appeared in only 2 places. A brief mention in a Washington Post article from 8 years ago about the murky world of private security contractors, and a single photo on a now-defunct military blog showing him shaking hands with a State Department official whose name had been redacted. Voss had always been good at staying in the shadows. He understood that power didn't need to be visible to be effective. The people who pulled the strings rarely stood in the spotlight. Caleb switched his search to Evelyn Cross and Cross Industries. That produced millions of results. The company was massive. Tech divisions, pharmaceutical research, defense contracts, even a venture capital arm that invested in promising startups. Evelyn herself had a fascinating biography. Daughter of a steelworker, scholarship to MIT, PhD in electrical engineering by 25, founded Cross Industries at 30. She'd built an empire from nothing, much like he'd built a new life from the ashes of his old one. The comparison made him uncomfortable. Around midnight, Caleb finally shut down the computer and checked the house one more time. Windows locked. Doors secure. Alarm armed. The reporters had finally left for the night, though he knew they'd be back at dawn. He was halfway to his bedroom when he heard the sound of an engine outside. Not unusual, the road past his property saw occasional traffic even at night, but this engine slowed as it approached his driveway, then stopped. Caleb moved to the window and peered carefully through the curtains. A black SUV sat at the end of his driveway, headlights off, engine idling. He couldn't see through the tinted windows. Couldn't tell how many people were inside. His hand found the Sig Sauer, chambered and ready on the bookshelf where he'd taken to keeping it these past few days. He watched the vehicle, his heart rate steady despite the adrenaline starting to flow through his system. Old training was kicking in, the calm that came from having faced worse situations than this. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, the SUV's engine revved and it pulled away, driving slowly down the dark road until its taillights disappeared around a bend. Caleb stood at the window for another 20 minutes, watching, waiting. The vehicle didn't return. Finally, he forced himself to breathe, to relax the tension in his shoulders. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just some lost tourist or a neighbor taking a late-night drive. Or maybe it was a message. We know where you are. The next morning was Thursday, 4 days since the crash. The news coverage had started to die down. There were always new tragedies, new stories to capture the public's attention. A few dedicated journalists still lingered near his property, but the circus was packing up its tents. Caleb was making breakfast when his phone rang. The number had a Washington, D.C. area code, but he didn't recognize it. He almost didn't answer, assuming it was another reporter. But something made him pick up. Hello? Caleb Hunter? A woman's voice, professional and authoritative. This is Special Agent Kendra Hall with the FBI. I need to speak with you about your military service record. The bottom dropped out of Caleb's stomach. I'm sorry, what? Your military service record, Mr. Hunter. Hunter. Specifically the years between your discharge from active duty and when you appeared in public records as a resident of Montana. There are some gaps we need to discuss. Would you be available for a meeting? Am I under investigation for something? Not at all. This is purely informational. However, given recent events that have brought you into the public eye, certain flags were raised in our system. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person rather than over the phone. Would tomorrow morning work for you? I can meet you anywhere that's convenient. Caleb's mind raced. The FBI didn't just call people for casual conversations. If they were asking about his missing years, someone must have prompted them to look, someone who knew what to look for. What flags are you talking about? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Agent Hall spoke again, her tone was more careful. Mr. Hunter, I think it would be in your best interest if we met. There are some things you need to be aware of. Some people who may be taking an interest in your recent fame. I'm trying to help you here. Are you talking about Aegis Group? Another pause, longer this time. So you do remember. It wasn't a question. Then you understand why we need to talk. Tomorrow morning. There's a diner called Maggie's Place on Route 93, about 15 miles north of your location. 10 a.m. Come alone, and please don't mention this conversation to anyone. She hung up before Caleb could respond. He stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to dead air. The FBI knew about Aegis, which meant either they'd been investigating the group independently or someone had pointed them in that direction. Caleb checked on Jamie, who was still sleeping peacefully in his room, one arm flung over his stuffed bear, the covers tangled around his legs the way they always were. The boy could sleep through anything, a blessing and a curse. Caleb watched his son for a long moment, memorizing the peaceful scene, because he knew, with cold certainty, that peace was about to become a rare commodity. That afternoon, he called Mrs. Henderson at the school and arranged for Jamie to attend a friend's birthday party on Friday evening, an overnight stay, well supervised. He sold it as giving Jamie some normalcy after being cooped up for days. Mrs. Henderson happily agreed to help coordinate it. Caleb needed his son somewhere safe, somewhere away from the house, before he met with the FBI agent, just in case. Friday morning dawned cold and gray, with heavy clouds promising rain. Caleb dropped Jamie off at his friend's house at 8 a.m., watching to make sure the boy was safely inside before he drove away. The mother, a cheerful woman named Beth who taught third grade, had promised to call if there were any problems. Maggie's Place was exactly the kind of diner Caleb had expected. Vinyl booths, checkered linoleum, the smell of coffee and bacon grease, a jukebox in the corner playing country music from the 70s. A handful of locals occupied the counter stools, farmers and truck drivers starting their day with eggs and toast. Agent Kendra Hall was waiting in a back booth, nursing a cup of coffee. She was in her mid-30s, African-American, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the alert posture of someone trained to notice everything. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a navy blazer, a white blouse, but something about the way she carried herself screamed law enforcement. Mr. Hunter. She gestured to the seat across from her. Thank you for coming. Caleb slid into the booth, hyper-aware of the weight of the pistol concealed at the small of his back under his jacket. He knew carrying it to meet an FBI agent was stupid, but old habits died hard. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want? Direct. I can appreciate that. Hall took a sip of her coffee, studying him over the rim of the cup. How much do you know about the current status of Aegis Group? I walked away 10 years ago. I haven't kept up. The organization still exists, though it's even more deeply buried now than when you were active. They've moved most of their operations to Africa and Southeast Asia, staying well away from congressional oversight. But certain people within our government have been concerned about some of their activities. And you're one of those concerned people. I'm part of a task force looking into private military contractors operating outside legal boundaries. Aegis is at the top of our list, has been for 3 years. Caleb felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. What does this have to do with me? Your name came up in some old operational reports we obtained through a source who used to work for State Department oversight. You were listed as an operative between 2013 and 2015. Then you disappeared from all records for several months before resurfacing in Montana with a new identity. Well, not technically new since Caleb Hunter is your birth name, but you'd been using aliases during your Aegis years. Is there a question in there somewhere? Hall leaned forward, her voice dropping. When you left Aegis, did you take anything with you? Files, documents, recordings, anything that might be of interest to an investigation? So that's what this was about. Caleb had wondered over the years whether anyone in law enforcement even knew the files existed. Apparently someone suspected. Why would I tell you if I did? Because Gareth Voss is going to come for you. Hall's words were blunt, stripping away any pretense. You've been off his radar for a decade, living quietly in the middle of nowhere. But 4 days ago, you became the most famous face in America. Every news outlet in the country ran your story. Your picture has been seen by millions of people, including Voss. Including Voss. Hall pulled out a tablet from her briefcase and tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to face him. These photos were taken 2 days ago at a private airfield outside Baltimore. That's Voss getting off a chartered flight from London. Caleb stared at the image. Gareth Voss looked older than he remembered. There was more gray in his dark hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but the man was still formidable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades commanding others. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with absolute confidence. Hall swiped to the next photo. Voss talking to 3 other men, all of them with the hard look of professional operators. We believe he's assembling a team. We don't know what for, but given the timing, she trailed off meaningfully. You think he's coming after me? I think he's coming after whatever you took from him, and I think he'll do whatever it takes to get it back. Caleb sat back in the booth, his mind processing scenarios. Voss wouldn't make a move in broad daylight, not with the media still paying occasional attention to the hero's story. But at night, in the remote location where Caleb lived, that would be easy. A 3-man team could infiltrate his property, neutralize him, tear the place apart looking for the files, and be gone before anyone knew what happened. What do you want from me, Agent Hall? Cooperation. If you have files that document Aegis's illegal activities, I want them. Not for myself, for the task force. We can use them to build a case, to shut down Aegis permanently and put Voss and his associates in prison where they belong. And in exchange? Protection, witness security, a new identity for you and your son, somewhere Voss will never find you, and legal immunity for any actions you took while working for Aegis, provided you testify. It was a good offer. Oh, a smart offer. Everything Caleb should want. But he'd learned not to trust easily, even people with FBI credentials. How do I know you're not working for Voss? How do I know this isn't a setup to find out what I have? Hall didn't look offended by the question. If anything, she seemed to respect the paranoia. You don't. Not for certain. All I can give you is my word and my badge, and the fact that I've spent 3 years of my life trying to bring these bastards down. She reached across the table and placed a business card in front of him. Think about it. But don't think too long. Voss is already in the country, and he's not here for a vacation. Caleb pocketed the card without looking at it. If I decide to cooperate, how does it work? You call the number on that card 24/7. We extract you and your son immediately, get you somewhere safe, and start the debrief. The entire process takes about 48 hours from contact to placement in witness security. That fast? We've been preparing for this possibility ever since your name came up in the investigation. I had hoped to approach you eventually, once we had more evidence. Your heroics just accelerated the timeline. The waitress came by to refill Hall's coffee and ask if Caleb wanted anything. He ordered coffee just to give himself a moment to think. After she left, he met Hall's eyes directly. I need time to consider this. Time is the one thing you don't have, Mr. Hunter. But I understand. You've built a life here. You have a son to protect. These aren't easy decisions. She stood, gathering her tablet and briefcase. My advice? Make your decisions soon. Because when Voss makes his move, it'll happen fast, and you won't get a second chance. After Hall left, Caleb sat in the booth for another 20 minutes, nursing his coffee and watching the rain start to fall outside. The diner was warm and ordinary, full of the comfortable sounds of small-town America. The clatter of dishes, the low murmur of conversation, someone feeding quarters into the jukebox. Normal life. The life he'd fought so hard to protect, and it was all about to come crashing down. Caleb paid for his coffee and drove home through the rain. His property looked different now, viewed through the lens of threat assessment. The trees that provided privacy could also provide cover for an assault team. The long driveway that gave him advance warning of visitors would also make escape difficult if someone blocked the exit. The isolation that had felt like safety now felt like vulnerability. He went inside and immediately checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The house was clear. But for how long? Caleb retrieved the waterproof case from under the floorboards and sat on his bed, staring at it. 10 years of safety, purchased with this insurance policy. But insurance only worked if you were willing to cash it in. His phone buzzed. A text from Beth, Jamie's friend's mother. Just wanted to let you know the boys are having a blast. Jamie asked if he could stay through Saturday night too. They want to go to the lake. Is that okay? Caleb's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to go pick up Jamie right now and run as far and fast as possible. But running wouldn't solve anything. Voss would find him eventually, and Jamie deserved better than a life spent looking over their shoulders. That's fine, he typed back. Thanks for keeping him. I'll pick him up Sunday morning. Another day of safety for his son. Another day to figure out what the hell he was going to do. Caleb was making a sandwich he didn't want when he heard the sound of a car engine outside. He moved to the window, hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. But it wasn't an assault team. It was the same black SUV from 3 nights ago, pulling into his driveway in broad daylight. Bold. Arrogant. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, and Caleb's blood turned to ice. Gareth Voss looked exactly like his photo, but seeing him in person, here at Caleb's home, made everything terrifyingly real. Voss stood by the SUV for a moment, looking at the house with an expression of mild interest, as if evaluating property he was considering purchasing. Then he smiled. It was the smile Caleb remembered from a dozen briefings, 100 operations. The smile that said Voss held all the cards and knew it. Caleb's phone rang. He answered without taking his eyes off the window. Hello, Caleb. Voss's voice was exactly as he remembered, smooth, cultured, with the faint trace of a Boston accent. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I thought it was time we had a conversation. How did you get this number? Please, you know how this works. I've had your number for years. I've always known exactly where you were. I just didn't have a reason to care until you decided to become a television star. Through the window, Caleb watched Voss lean casually against the SUV, phone to his ear, completely relaxed, as if he didn't have a care in the world. What do you want, Voss? I want what you took from me. The files, Caleb. You know which ones I'm talking about. The comprehensive documentation of every operation Aegis ran during your tenure. The ones that contain rather incriminating evidence of activities that certain governments would find very interesting. I don't know what you're talking about. Voss's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. Come now. We're both professionals here. Let's not insult each other with denials. You took the files as insurance when you ran. Smart move, actually. I respected it. As long as you stayed quiet, stayed invisible, the arrangement worked for both of us. And now? Now you've become visible, very visible, which creates problems. Problems for me, problems for the organization, problems for people much more powerful than either of us. Those people are nervous, Caleb. They're wondering if the famous hero might decide to tell his story. They're wondering what other secrets he might reveal. I haven't said anything to anyone. Not yet. But the FBI has been sniffing around Aegis for years. How long before Agent Hall, yes, I know about your meeting this morning, how long before she convinces you to trade those files for protection? Caleb said nothing. Voss already knew too much. Here's the situation, Voss continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. You have something I need. I'm prepared to offer you a choice. Return the files, and you and your son can go back to your quiet life. I'll even throw in some money, $500,000, untraceable, as a gesture of goodwill. You can send your boy to any college he wants. And if I refuse? The smile disappeared from Voss's face. Even through the window, even at a distance, Caleb could see the shift from affable to lethal. Then I take the files anyway, and your son grows up without a father. Don't make this complicated, Caleb. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and I know every move you're going to make before you make it. I trained you, remember? You're threatening a child. I'm stating facts. You have something that belongs to me. I'm going to get it back. The only question is how much damage gets done in the process. Voss paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was almost gentle. You were a good operative, Caleb. One of my best. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you force my hand. You have 72 hours to decide. After that, we do this the hard way. The line went dead. Voss pocketed his phone, gave the house one last long look, and climbed back into the SUV. He drove away slowly, no rush, no urgency. A man completely in control of the situation. Caleb stood at the window for a long time after the SUV disappeared, his heart pounding, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline he couldn't release. 72 hours. 3 days to decide between surrender and war. 3 days to figure out how to protect his son from the past that had finally caught up with him. He looked down at his phone, at the business card Agent Hall had given him that morning, now sitting on his kitchen counter. Then he looked at the waterproof case containing the files, sitting on his bed where he'd left it. And he looked at the photo of Jamie on the mantel, his son's gap-toothed smile, his messy hair, his innocent eyes that had never seen violence or fear or the darkness that lived in men like Gareth Voss. Caleb had spent 10 years trying to build a wall between his past and his present. Now that wall had been breached, and he had to make a choice: run, fight, or surrender. None of the options were good, but one of them might be survivable. He picked up his phone and pulled up his contact list. His finger hovered over Beth's number. He could call, tell her there was an emergency, pick up Jamie right now and drive until the tank ran empty. But Voss's words echoed in his mind. I'll even throw in some money, $500,000. That kind of offer meant Voss was desperate, which meant the files were even more valuable than Caleb had realized, which meant they were leverage. Caleb scrolled to a different number, the one Agent Kendra Hall had given him that morning. But he didn't call. Not yet. Instead, he opened his laptop and accessed an encrypted email account he'd set up years ago and never used. He typed a brief message. I have what you're looking for, but I need guarantees for my son's safety before we talk. If you're serious about shutting down Aegis, prove it. I'll be in touch. He sent the email to an address he'd memorized 10 years ago, a dead drop, monitored by someone in the intelligence community who specialized in collecting information on private military contractors. Whether anyone still checked it was another question. But it was worth a try. Then Caleb composed a second email, this one to an encrypted server he'd set up years ago. He uploaded copies of the most damning files, not everything, but enough to serve as a sample of what he had, proof that the insurance policy was real. He set the email to send automatically in 74 hours, unless he logged in and manually canceled it. If Voss tried to take him out, if anything happened to him, the files would automatically go to 3 different news organizations, 2 congressional oversight committees, and the International Criminal Court. A dead man's switch. Insurance on top of insurance. Caleb leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of decisions made and bridges burned. He'd just committed himself to a course of action. No more hiding. No more pretending he could keep his past and present separated. The war Voss had threatened was coming whether Caleb wanted it or not, but he'd be damned if he'd face it unprepared. He spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. He moved the waterproof case to a new location, buried in the woods behind his property, marked with a GPS coordinate only he knew. He packed a go-bag with clothes, cash, documents, and weapons. He reviewed the layout of his property with fresh eyes, identifying exit routes, defensive positions, places where an assault could be mounted or repelled. Old skills, dusted off and put back to use. As the sun set and darkness fell over the Montana woods, Caleb stood on his porch and looked out at the trees. The rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh and clean. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. The wind whispered through the pines. Peaceful. But the peace was an illusion now. The monsters from his past had found him, and there was no putting them back in the box. Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Sample received. Very interesting. We should talk. Tomorrow, noon, same location. Come alone. KH Agent Hall had gotten his message somehow, or maybe she'd been monitoring him all along. Either way, she wanted to meet. A second text arrived moments later, this one from a different unknown number. Clock is ticking, Caleb. 68 hours remaining. Don't waste them. G.V. Voss, reminding him of the deadline. Turning the screws. Caleb looked at both messages, then deleted them. Tomorrow, he'd meet with Hall. He'd hear what the FBI was really offering, and he'd make his decision. But tonight, he just wanted to think about his son. About the life they'd built together, about fishing trips and Lego fortresses and bedtime stories, about everything worth fighting for. Because in 72 hours, one way or another, the fight would begin. And Caleb Hunter would be ready. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat in his darkened living room with the Sig Sauer on his lap, watching the road through a gap in the curtains. Every set of headlights that passed made his pulse quicken. Every sound in the darkness, an owl's cry, a branch scraping against the roof, the settling of old wood, sent his hand reaching for the weapon. Around 3 in the morning, his phone lit up with an incoming call. Unknown number. He let it ring twice before answering. Caleb Hunter. A woman's voice, but not Agent Hall. This voice was hoarse, tired, but unmistakably familiar. Ms. Cross? I'm sorry to call so late. The hospital finally released me this evening, and I've been catching up on, well, everything. Evelyn Cross paused, and Caleb heard the rustle of papers or fabric in the background. Miranda tells me you haven't responded to my letter. I've had a complicated few days. I can imagine. Actually, no, I probably can't imagine. But I wanted to reach out personally because Miranda also tells me there's been suspicious activity around your property. A black SUV, men watching your house. She has people keeping an eye on the media situation, and they noticed things that concerned them. Caleb sat up straighter. You're having me surveilled? I'm having the area surveilled. There's a difference. After what you did for me, I felt responsible for the chaos that followed. The media attention, the invasion of your privacy, that's on me. My crash brought all of this into your life. So yes, I've had security monitoring the situation to make sure it doesn't escalate into something dangerous. It already has. Another pause, longer this time. When Evelyn spoke again, her voice was careful. The men in the SUV, they're not reporters, are they? No. Are you in trouble, Mr. Hunter? Caleb's instinct was to deflect, to maintain the fiction that everything was fine. But sitting alone in his dark house, with Voss's deadline ticking down and his son's safety hanging in the balance, the pretense felt pointless. Yes, he said simply. I'm in trouble. Can I help? Why would you want to? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything beyond a thank you letter, which you've already sent. You're wrong about that. Evelyn's voice was firm. You dove into freezing water and pulled me from a sinking plane. You gave me back my life. That creates a bond, Mr. Hunter, whether either of us planned for it or not. So if you're in danger, if there's something I can do, resources I can provide, people I can call, then I want to help. Please, let me do this. Caleb closed his eyes, weighing options and consequences. Evelyn Cross was powerful, connected, wealthy. She had resources he couldn't imagine, but involving her also meant bringing her into his mess, putting her at risk from people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who got in their way. It's complicated, he said finally, and dangerous, the kind of dangerous that gets people killed. I've built a company from nothing in an industry dominated by men who wanted to see me fail. I've survived hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and at least 2 serious threats to my life. I'm not afraid of complicated or dangerous. She paused. But I'm afraid of standing by while someone who saved my life faces threats alone. So please, talk to me. There was something in her voice, a sincerity that cut through all his defenses. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the crushing weight of carrying this burden alone for so long. Or maybe it was just the desperate need to trust someone, anyone, in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. I used to work for a private military contractor, Caleb said quietly. Shadow operations, the kind that never make the news. I left 10 years ago and took some insurance with me, files documenting illegal activities. I thought I was safe, thought they'd leave me alone as long as I stayed quiet, but then my face ended up on every television in America. And now they've come to collect. His name is Gareth Voss. He was my handler back then. He gave me 72 hours to return the files or... Caleb trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Or he'll hurt your son. The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. I can't let that happen, Caleb said, his voice rough. Jamie is everything. He's all I have left of my wife, all I have left of the good parts of who I used to be. I'll burn the world down before I let anyone touch him. You won't have to. Evelyn's tone shifted, becoming businesslike and decisive. Where's Jamie now? At a friend's house. Safe, for the moment. Good. Keep him there. I'm going to make some calls. I have a security team, former Secret Service, FBI, military special forces. The best people money can hire. I'll have them at your location within 3 hours. Ms. Cross, Evelyn, and don't argue with me about this. You saved my life. The least I can do is help protect yours." She paused. "There's something else. You mentioned files, evidence of illegal operations. Have you considered going to the authorities?" "The FBI already approached me. Agent named Kendra Hall. She wants the files in exchange for witness protection." "Do you trust her?" Caleb thought about Hall's sharp eyes, her direct manner, the way she'd laid out the situation without pretense or manipulation. "I don't know, maybe, but trust doesn't matter much when men like Voss are involved. They have resources, connections, people inside law enforcement. Even with FBI protection, I'm not sure Jamie would be safe." "Then we need to be smarter than them. You have leverage, the files. We need to use that leverage to end this permanently, not just postpone it." Evelyn's voice took on a strategic edge. "Here's what I'm thinking. We bring in Agent Hall, but on our terms. We arrange a meeting in a controlled location, somewhere Voss can't touch you. We set a trap. You're talking about using me as bait. I'm talking about ending this threat before it escalates. Voss gave you 72 hours. That means he's planning to make his move soon regardless of what you decide. Better to control the when and where of the confrontation than to wait for him to strike when you're vulnerable." It was a good plan. A dangerous plan, but good. Caleb's military training had taught him that the best defense was often a calculated offense. If Voss was coming anyway, better to choose the battleground. "There's one problem," Caleb said. "Voss knows how I think. He trained me. He'll anticipate a trap. Then we need to make sure the trap is one he can't resist. What does Voss want more than anything? The files." "Exactly. So we offer him the files. A meeting, an exchange, but we stack the deck so heavily in our favor that when he walks into the trap, he has no choice but to surrender." Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. The plan had merit, but it required perfect execution, absolute coordination, and a level of trust he wasn't sure he was capable of anymore. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Really, this goes way beyond gratitude." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, more personal. "When I was in that plane, drowning, I had time to think about my life, about the choices I'd made, the things I'd prioritized. I built an empire, but I didn't build much else. No family, no real friends, just business associates and employees. I was so focused on success that I forgot about significance. And then you pulled me out of that water, and I realized I'd been given a second chance. A chance to be someone who does more than accumulate wealth and power. Someone who actually matters to the people around them." She paused, and Caleb could hear the emotion in her voice. "You didn't hesitate to risk your life for a stranger. That means something. It means you're exactly the kind of person worth fighting for. So yes, I'm going to help you. Not because I owe you a debt, but because it's the right thing to do. And maybe because I need to prove to myself that my second chance at life is going to be different than my first." Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a knot of tension loosening slightly. "Okay," he said. "Tell me what you need me to do." "First, get some rest. You're no good to anyone exhausted. My security team will be there soon. A man named Marcus Chen is leading them. Former Delta Force, completely trustworthy. He'll coordinate protection for your property until we're ready to move. Second, we need to bring Agent Hall into this. Can you contact her?" "I'm meeting her at noon today. Same diner as yesterday." "Perfect. I'll join you. We'll lay out the situation and see if she's willing to work with us on this. If the FBI can help us build a case while also protecting you, that's the best outcome." "And if Voss doesn't wait for the 72 hours? If he moves sooner?" "Then Marcus and his team will be ready. But I don't think Voss will jump the gun. Men like him, they're methodical. They stick to their plans. He gave you a deadline because he wants you to stew in it, to make mistakes out of fear. We're not going to give him that satisfaction." After they ended the call, Caleb finally allowed himself to feel a sliver of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. He had allies, powerful allies who could match Voss's resources. True to Evelyn's word, 3 black SUVs arrived at his property exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes later. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, painting it in shades of pink and gold. Caleb watched through his security camera as 6 figures emerged from the vehicles, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals. Marcus Chen knocked on the door exactly as the sun crested the horizon. He was a compact man in his late 30s, Asian American, with intelligent eyes and the alert stillness of someone who'd spent years in combat zones. He wore tactical clothing and carried himself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Hunter, Marcus Chen, Cross Industry Security. Ms. Cross briefed me on the situation. May we come in?" Caleb opened the door. Marcus entered first, eyes sweeping the room, cataloging everything. 5 others followed, 3 men and 2 women, all with the same professional demeanor. "We're going to establish a perimeter," Marcus said without preamble. 2-person teams, rotating shifts, thermal imaging, and motion sensors on the access points. Anyone tries to approach this property will know about it long before they get close. "Ms. Cross also arranged for aerial surveillance. We have a drone with night vision capabilities that'll patrol the area after dark." "That seems like overkill." Marcus's expression didn't change. Ms. Cross was very clear about the level of threat. She described your former employer as a highly capable operator with unlimited resources. "In my experience, you can't be too careful with people like that. Besides, we're not just protecting you. Your son comes home eventually, right? We need to make sure this place is locked down before that happens." The casual mention of Jamie made Caleb's protective instincts flare. "My son stays away until this is resolved." "Agreed, but eventually you'll want him back. Our job is to make sure eventually is safe." Marcus gestured to his team. "Do you have a layout of the property? I need to understand the terrain, identify likely approach vectors." They spent the next hour going over Caleb's 3 acres in detail. The wooded areas that could provide cover, the clear sight lines from the house, the single road in and out. Marcus asked intelligent questions and made strategic suggestions, turning Caleb's modest property into something resembling a defensible position. "One more thing," Marcus said as his team dispersed to their assignments. "Ms. Cross told me about the meeting with the FBI agent today. I'll be accompanying you. 2 of my team will maintain security here. The rest will provide mobile support and surveillance. Voss might be watching. If he sees a security detail, he'll know something's up. We'll be discreet, but there's no way Ms. Cross is letting you walk into a meeting without backup, not after what happened yesterday." Her orders were very explicit. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Between you and me, I've never seen her this invested in someone's safety. Whatever you did for her, it made an impression." By the time Caleb left for Maggie's place at 11:30, his property looked deceptively normal. But he knew that behind the trees and the vehicles parked strategically along nearby roads, Marcus's team was watching everything. The diner was moderately busy with the lunch crowd, locals, truckers, a family with 2 small children occupying a booth near the window. Agent Kendra Hall sat in the same back booth as yesterday, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in his 50s sat across from her, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of senior law enforcement. Caleb slid into the booth next to the stranger, forcing Hall and her companion to face him. "You said, come alone." "This is Special Agent Michael Torres, my supervisor on the task force," Hall said. "Given what you sent us last night, we thought it was important to have him here." "What did he send you?" The question came from behind Caleb. He turned to find Evelyn Cross approaching the booth, moving carefully, the injuries from the crash still bothering her. She wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, her hair pulled back, a fading bruise visible on her left temple. Without the designer clothes and professional polish from her business photos, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Paul's eyes widened. "Ms. Cross, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "Neither did I, until about 2 hours ago." Evelyn slid into the booth next to Caleb, moving with a slight wince. "But Mr. Hunter is helping me as much as I'm helping him, so we're in this together. Now, someone want to explain what he sent you last night?" Torres cleared his throat. "Ms. Cross, with all due respect, this is a federal investigation. We can't just—" "Can't what? Acknowledge that Mr. Hunter sent you evidence of crimes committed by Aegis Group? Evidence he's kept secret for 10 years because he feared for his life?" Evelyn's voice was calm but firm. "I may be a civilian, but I employ more former intelligence officers than you have in your entire task force. I understand classification and need to know. I also understand that Caleb is in immediate danger, and your bureaucratic procedures won't mean much if he's dead. So let's dispense with the territorial posturing and figure out how to keep him alive while also taking down Gareth Voss. Torres studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Mr. Hunter, the files you sent us as a sample are extraordinary. If the rest of your cache is similar, we're looking at RICO charges, violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, potentially even war crimes. This could dismantle Aegis completely and put dozens of people in prison for decades. That's good, right? Caleb said. That's what you want. It is, but there's a problem. Files alone aren't enough. We need corroborating testimony, witnesses who can authenticate the documents and testify to their accuracy. Ideally, we need you on the stand walking a jury through what each operation involved and how you know the information is legitimate. That could take months. Years, maybe. I don't have that kind of time. Voss is coming for me now. Hall leaned forward. Which is why we need to move fast. Here's what I'm proposing. We take you into protective custody immediately. You, your son, anyone else who might be at risk. We debrief you, build the case, and when we're ready, we arrange Voss's arrest on charges supported by your evidence. Once he's in custody, you testify, and then you and Jamie disappear into witness protection. And how long until Voss is arrested? Days? Weeks? Realistically, 4 to 6 weeks, maybe longer. We need to coordinate with justice, get warrants, build an airtight case. These things take time. Caleb shook his head. I don't have 6 weeks. Voss gave me 72 hours. Less than that now. You think he's just going to sit around waiting for you to get your paperwork in order? If you're in protective custody, he can't touch you. You don't know Voss. He has people everywhere. Informants, assets, corrupt officials. How many private military contractors have FBI agents on their payroll? How many local cops? Hell, how do I know someone in your own task force isn't feeding him information? Torres's face reddened. That's a serious accusation. It's a realistic concern, Evelyn interjected smoothly. Aegis has been operating for decades with apparent impunity. That doesn't happen without inside help. So while I'm sure your team is thoroughly vetted, Caleb's paranoia is justified. Hall exchanged a glance with Torres, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she sighed. Okay, you're right to be cautious, so what do you propose? Caleb glanced at Evelyn, who gave him an encouraging nod. We draw Voss out, set up a meeting, offer him the files, and when he shows up, you arrest him. All of his people too, anyone he brings with him. We do it in one coordinated operation, and we do it in the next 48 hours. That's extremely risky, Torres said. If anything goes wrong, I'm dead anyway. At least this way, I'm controlling the situation instead of reacting to it. Hall tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. It could work. If we choose the location carefully, if we have overwhelming tactical support, if we can monitor all approaches, yes, it could work. But it would require perfect coordination and absolute secrecy. We couldn't involve more than a handful of people on our end. How would you even get Voss to show up? Torres asked. He's not stupid. He'll smell a trap. He'll show up because I'm going to offer him exactly what he wants. The original files, all of them, no copies, in exchange for leaving me and my son alone. I'll make it convincing. Scared father, desperate to protect his kid, willing to surrender his leverage to buy safety. He'll believe it because it's what he expects. Evelyn pulled out her phone. And we'll sweeten the deal. The meeting will be at a Cross Industries property, a warehouse facility we own outside Seattle. It's legitimate, documented, a place where a business transaction might realistically occur. Voss will see it as neutral ground, not a law enforcement setup. Why Seattle? Hall asked. That's 6 hours from here. Because Seattle is FBI territory. You have field offices, tactical teams, infrastructure. And because it's far enough from Caleb's home that Voss won't suspect a trap. If we tried to do this in Montana, in Caleb's backyard, he'd never buy it. Torres was nodding slowly. And Cross Industries has legitimate business reasons to be involved. Security consultation, perhaps a potential partnership. It gives the meeting a veneer of credibility. Exactly. I'll even be there personally, offering to broker the arrangement. A billionaire CEO playing mediator between two men with a complicated past. It's believable. Hall pulled out a small notebook and began sketching a rough plan. We'd need to stage the warehouse, make it look like an actual business facility, not a trap. Concealed FBI presence, sniper positions on the surrounding buildings, drones for aerial coverage. We locked down the entire area without making it obvious. How many agents? Caleb asked. Minimum 20, probably 30 if we do this right. Hostage rescue team, tactical coordinators, surveillance units, and it all has to be off book until the moment we move. No official paperwork, no warrant requests that might leak. Torres looked uncomfortable. Kendra, that's a lot of risk. If this goes sideways, if Voss gets hurt or gets away, our careers are over, maybe worse. If we do nothing, Caleb dies and we lose the best chance we've ever had to take down Aegis. I'm willing to take the risk. Hall met her supervisor's eyes steadily. Are you? The older agent sat quietly for a moment, weighing consequences and duty. Finally, he nodded. Okay, we do it, but we do it smart. Overwhelming force, perfect intelligence, and we treat Voss like the dangerous operator he is. No cowboy heroics, no improvisation. We plan this down to the last detail. Agreed, Evelyn said. Mr. Chen and his team can provide additional tactical support. They're not law enforcement, but they're extremely capable. If something goes wrong, you'll want them in the mix. Hall looked like she wanted to object, then reconsidered. Fine, but they follow FBI tactical command. I'm not having a shootout because someone went off script. Understood. They spent the next 2 hours planning. Caleb called Voss from a burner phone Marcus had provided, keeping his voice appropriately nervous and defeated. I'll give you the files, all of them, but I want guarantees. My son stays safe, you leave us alone forever, and you wire the money you promised to an account I'll provide. Voss's response was smooth, almost sympathetic. Of course, Caleb. I told you I don't want anyone to get hurt. This is just business. Where and when? Tomorrow night, 10 p.m. There's a Cross Industries warehouse facility in Seattle, 4400 Terminal Avenue. You know the one? A pause. Why Seattle? Why a Cross Industries location? Because Ms. Cross offered to help broker the deal. She feels responsible for the media attention that started this mess. She's willing to act as a neutral party, make sure both sides honor the agreement. Caleb let some bitterness creep into his voice. And because if this meeting happens on her property, with her security present, I feel safer. You're not going to start shooting with a billionaire CEO as a witness. Voss chuckled. Smart. Very smart. I see you haven't forgotten everything I taught you. Fine, 10 p.m. Tomorrow at the Seattle warehouse. I'll bring 2 associates. You bring the files. We make the exchange, transfer the money, and everyone walks away happy. How do I know you'll honor the deal? You don't. But you also don't have any other choice, do you? See you tomorrow, Caleb. Don't be late. The line went dead. Caleb set down the phone, his hand shaking slightly. He'd done it. The trap was set. He bought it, Hall said. It wasn't a question. He bought it. But he's not stupid. He'll scout the location, probably send people ahead to check for surprises. We need to make sure everything looks exactly as it should. We will. Torres pulled out his own phone. I'm activating the tactical team. They'll stage tonight, set up surveillance positions, work out the approach angles. By tomorrow evening, that warehouse will be the most secure location in Washington state. Evelyn stood, wincing slightly. I should get back to my hotel. I have some calls to make, people to brief. Marcus will coordinate with your team on security specifics. Hall stood as well, extending her hand to Evelyn. Ms. Cross, I appreciate your help with this. I know involving civilians in an operation goes against protocol, but your resources are making the difference. I'm just glad I can help. Caleb gave me my life back. The least I can do is make sure he gets to keep his. After Evelyn and the FBI agents left, Caleb sat alone in the booth for a few minutes, nursing cold coffee and trying to process what had just happened. In less than 12 hours, he'd gone from isolated and terrified to surrounded by allies and actively hunting his hunter. It felt surreal, dangerous, but also right. Marcus appeared at the table, sliding into the seat Evelyn had vacated. That went well. You were listening. I was securing the perimeter, but yes, I heard most of it. Marcus's expression was serious. Are you ready for this? Tomorrow night, things are going to get real very quickly. Voss is a professional. Even with overwhelming force on our side, there's a chance he'll see through the trap. If that happens, people could die. I know. And you're still willing to go through with it? Caleb thought about Jamie, safe at his friend's house, building Lego fortresses and swimming in the lake, completely unaware that his father was about to put himself in the crosshairs of a man who'd killed more people than Caleb could count. I don't have a choice. If I run, Voss finds me eventually. If I surrender the files without a trap, he kills me anyway to tie up loose ends. The only way forward is through. Marcus nodded slowly. Then let's make sure you survive it. We've got 24 hours to prepare. Let's use them. They drove back to Caleb's property in convoy, 3 SUVs moving in coordinated formation. Marcus spent the drive on the phone with his team and with Hall's tactical coordinators, working out details and contingencies. The rest of that day and all of the next passed in a blur of preparation. FBI agents arrived in unmarked vehicles, setting up surveillance equipment and communications relays. Marcus's team ran security drills, practiced response scenarios, turned the Seattle warehouse into a kill box that Voss would walk into without ever seeing the walls closing in. Caleb spent the time with the files, reviewing their contents with Hall and 2 other agents who specialized in prosecuting private military contractors. They documented everything: dates, operations, payments, names of officials who'd authorized illegal missions. The files were even more damning than Caleb had remembered. "This is incredible," one of the agents said, a young woman named Sarah Park, who'd spent 5 years prosecuting war crimes at The Hague. "With this evidence and your testimony, we could take down not just Aegis, but 6 government officials who authorized these operations. This is career-making stuff." "It's also life-ending stuff if Voss gets his hands on it," Caleb reminded her. "Everything in those files stays locked down until after tomorrow night." "Understood. We've already uploaded encrypted copies to 3 different secure servers. Even if something happens to the originals, we have backups." That evening, Caleb called Jamie. The boys' excited chatter about swimming and campfires and staying up late filled the phone, innocent joy that made Caleb's chest ache. "When can I come home, Dad?" "Soon, buddy, maybe a couple more days. I'm dealing with some work stuff." "Is it because of the lady from the plane? Are you helping her with something?" Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. "Yeah, something like that. But don't worry about it. You just have fun with your friends, okay? I love you." "Love you too, Dad. Can we go fishing again when I get home? I want to catch a really big fish this time." "Absolutely. We'll catch the biggest fish in the whole lake." After the call ended, Caleb sat in his quiet house and let himself feel the weight of what was coming. In less than 24 hours, he'd be face to face with Gareth Voss for the first time in a decade. The man who'd recruited him, trained him, turned him into a weapon. The man who'd been willing to threaten a child to protect his secrets. Tomorrow night, it would end, one way or another. The next morning dawned cold and gray, with heavy clouds promising rain. Caleb barely noticed the weather. He moved through the final preparations mechanically, checking equipment, reviewing the plan one more time, trying not to think about all the ways things could go wrong. At noon, Marcus gathered everyone for a final briefing. His team, the FBI tactical units who'd arrived overnight, Hall and Torres, even Evelyn, who'd flown back from Seattle specifically for this meeting. "Our objective is simple," Hall said, standing in front of a large monitor displaying the warehouse layout. "We let Voss and his team enter the facility. Caleb makes the exchange, or appears to. Once we have confirmation that Voss is on site and that all his associates are accounted for, we move in. Overwhelming force, no warning, no opportunity to resist. We want prisoners, not bodies." Torres pointed to various positions on the map. "Sniper teams here, here, and here. Tactical entry teams at all 4 entrances. Surveillance drones overhead with thermal imaging. We'll have positive identification on every person in that building." "What if Voss brings more people than expected?" someone asked. "We adapt, but intelligence suggests his usual team is 3 operators plus himself. He's not going to roll in with an army. That would attract too much attention. He thinks he's dealing with a scared carpenter who just wants his quiet life back. He's going to bring enough firepower to feel secure, but not enough to trigger concern." Marcus took over. "My team will be inside the warehouse, posing as cross-industry security. Voss expects that. What he won't expect is that we're all former special forces with direct communication to FBI tactical. If shooting starts, we provide immediate response while your entry teams converge. Evelyn spoke up. And I'll be there as well, just as promised. Caleb and I arrive together. I make a brief appearance to establish my presence. Then I retreat to an office area that's actually a reinforced safe room. Voss sees me, believes the cover story, but I'm not actually in the line of fire. Ms. Cross, I really wish you'd reconsider being there at all, Hall said. This is going to be dangerous. I gave my word. If I'm not there, Voss might suspect a trap. Besides, I'll be perfectly safe in the panic room. Mr. Chen has made sure of that. They ran through the timeline 3 more times, identifying potential problems and working out solutions. By the time they were done, Caleb felt reasonably confident they'd covered every contingency. Reasonably. Not completely. Because he knew Voss, and he knew that men like Voss always had a backup plan. At 4 p.m., Caleb and Marcus climbed into one of the SUVs and began the drive to Seattle. The others would travel separately, arriving at staggered times to avoid drawing attention. Evelyn was already in Seattle, at the Cross Industries headquarters, maintaining her normal business schedule to avoid any suggestion that something unusual was happening. The 6-hour drive passed mostly in silence. Caleb watched the landscape roll by, mountains giving way to forests, forests giving way to foothills, eventually the sprawl of the Seattle metropolitan area rising up around them like a concrete jungle. They arrived at the warehouse at 9 p.m., 1 hour before the scheduled meeting. The facility was enormous, a blocky structure of steel and concrete that could have held a dozen football fields. Cross Industries used it for equipment storage and logistics coordination, but tonight it was nearly empty, cleared of most inventory to provide clear sightlines and room to maneuver. FBI tactical units were already in position, invisible among the shadows and structural elements. Caleb knew they were there only because Hall had told him where to look. Even knowing, he could barely make them out. Impressive, Marcus murmured. Your federal friends do good work. Let's hope it's good enough. Evelyn met them in a small office area that had been converted into a command center. Multiple monitors showed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the warehouse and on surrounding buildings. Hall sat at a console, coordinating final positioning with her tactical teams. We're ready, she said without looking up. All units in position, communications check complete, rules of engagement clearly established. As soon as Voss is secured, we move. And if he resists? Caleb asked. Then we're authorized to use necessary force to protect lives and complete the arrest. But we want him alive. A dead Voss means a harder case to prosecute and potential martyrdom among his people. A Voss in prison, facing decades behind bars, testifying against co-conspirators in exchange for a lighter sentence, that's how we dismantle the entire organization. Caleb checked his watch. 9:40. 20 minutes until Voss was scheduled to arrive. The wait was excruciating. Caleb stood in the center of the warehouse floor, a leather briefcase containing carefully prepared fake files at his feet. The real files were safely in FBI custody, backed up on multiple secure servers. But Voss didn't know that. He'd see the briefcase, see Caleb's nervous expression, and believe he'd won. At 9:58, Hall's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece Caleb wore. We have vehicles approaching. 3 SUVs, just like predicted. They're stopping at the exterior gate. Caleb forced himself to breathe normally. This was it. Gate is opening, Hall continued. Vehicles proceeding to the main entrance. I'm counting. 7 individuals. That's more than expected. Torres, be advised. We have additional hostiles. 7. Voss had brought backup, probably anticipating a double cross. Smart, but not smart enough. The warehouse doors rolled open. Gareth Voss walked in first, dressed in an expensive suit that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. Behind him came 6 men, all carrying themselves like professionals. Caleb recognized 2 of them from his Aegis days, Carl Henderson and Dmitry Volkov, both stone-cold killers who'd worked dozens of operations. Voss stopped 20 feet from Caleb, his eyes sweeping the warehouse, taking in the layout, the shadows, the potential ambush points. His gaze lingered on the overhead catwalks, the office windows, the carefully stacked equipment crates that could hide anything. Caleb, he said pleasantly, right on time. I appreciate punctuality. Let's just get this over with. Caleb let his voice shake slightly. You get the files, you transfer the money, and we both walk away. Of course. Though I notice you've brought quite a lot of security for a simple business transaction. Voss nodded toward the shadows where Marcus and two of his team stood in Cross Industries uniforms. Ms. Cross doesn't take chances, does she? She's being cautious. Given what happened to her plane, can you blame her? Not at all. Speaking of which, where's the lady herself? I was rather looking forward to meeting the woman whose life you saved so dramatically. As if on cue, Evelyn emerged from the office area, walking with careful dignity despite her lingering injuries. She crossed the warehouse floor to stand beside Caleb, her presence a statement of solidarity. Mr. Voss, I presume. I'm Evelyn Cross. Mr. Hunter has asked me to witness this transaction to ensure both parties honor their agreement. Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Cross. A pleasure. Though I'm curious why a woman of your stature would involve herself in such a sordid affair. Mr. Hunter saved my life. That creates obligations. I'm simply ensuring he's treated fairly. How noble. Voss's gaze shifted back to Caleb. The files? Caleb nudged the briefcase forward with his foot. Right here. All the original documentation, no copies. You transfer the money to the account I provided, you walk out with the case, and we never see each other again. Voss nodded to Henderson, who stepped forward and picked up the briefcase. He opened it, examined the files inside, checking dates and classifications. After a moment, he looked up and nodded to Voss. Everything appears to be in order, Voss said. He pulled out a phone. I'm making the transfer now, $500,000, as promised. Caleb's own phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at the screen, seeing the confirmation of funds deposited to a dummy account the FBI had set up. Got it. Excellent. Then our business is concluded. Voss started to turn away, then stopped. Though I'm curious about one thing, Caleb. Did you really think I'd believe this was genuine? Time seemed to slow. Caleb saw Voss's hand move to his jacket, saw Henderson and the others reaching for weapons, heard Hall's voice in his earpiece screaming, "Move, move, move! FBI, nobody move!" The warehouse exploded into chaos. Tactical teams poured in from every entrance, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. Overhead, the sniper teams had Voss and his men in their crosshairs. The trap had been sprung, but Voss was faster than anyone expected. In one smooth motion, he drew a pistol and grabbed Evelyn, yanking her against his body as a shield. The gun pressed to her temple. "Stand down!" he roared. "Everyone stand down or I blow her head off." The FBI teams froze. Hall's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Hold positions. Nobody fire. Voss, let her go. You're surrounded. There's no way out." "There's always a way out." Voss started backing toward one of the side doors, dragging Evelyn with him. "You're going to let me and my men leave, or Ms. Cross dies right here." Caleb saw the calculation in Voss's eyes. The man was serious. He'd kill Evelyn without hesitation if it meant escaping. The training Caleb had spent 10 years trying to forget came flooding back. He saw the angles, the distances, the split-second timing required. He was 15 feet from Voss, too far to rush without getting Evelyn killed. But there was another option. Marcus had given him a weapon before they'd entered the warehouse, a small pistol concealed at his ankle, just in case. Caleb had protested, said he didn't want to be armed, didn't want the temptation to fall back into old patterns. But Marcus had insisted. Now, Caleb was grateful. He caught Marcus's eye across the warehouse floor. The former Delta Force operator gave the tiniest nod, understanding instantly what Caleb intended. "Voss," Caleb said, taking a small step forward. "Let her go. You want me, not her. I'm the one who took your files. I'm the one who betrayed you. Let her go and take me instead." Noble, but stupid. Voss pressed the gun harder against Evelyn's temple. She whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "Neither are you." Caleb took another step. "You're surrounded by FBI tactical teams and sniper rifles. You're not getting out of here with her. But you might get out with me, trade hostages. You're more likely to escape with someone trained, someone who knows your protocols." Voss hesitated, considering. In that moment of distraction, Marcus moved. He didn't rush Voss. That would be suicide. Instead, he threw a flashbang grenade that had been concealed in his jacket. The device hit the floor between Voss and the FBI teams, detonating with a blast of light and sound that momentarily blinded everyone. Caleb moved on instinct. He dropped to one knee, pulled the pistol from his ankle holster, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Not at Voss, too much risk of hitting Evelyn, but at the ground near Voss's feet, forcing the man to flinch, to move, to break his grip on his hostage. Evelyn dropped, rolling away. Voss stumbled backward, temporarily blinded by the flashbang, his gun hand wavering. FBI tactical teams surged forward. Red laser dots painted Voss's chest from a dozen different angles. Down! Get down, now! Voss made a last desperate choice. Instead of surrendering, he brought his weapon up, aiming at the nearest FBI agent. 4 shots rang out simultaneously from different sniper positions. Voss jerked backward, his gun clattering to the floor. He collapsed, blood spreading across his expensive suit. The warehouse erupted in coordinated motion. FBI agents swarmed Voss's men, who dropped their weapons at the first sight of overwhelming force. Medics rushed to Voss, working frantically to stabilize him. Caleb ran to Evelyn, helping her to her feet. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" She was shaking, but managed a weak smile. "I'm fine. That was terrifying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you got pulled into this. You saved my life, again." She touched his arm. "We're even now." Hall approached, her face flushed with adrenaline. "Is he alive?" One of the medics looked up. "Yeah, critical condition, but he'll make it. He's going to need surgery." "Good. Get him stabilized and into custody. I want him under guard at the hospital, and I want it done now." Hall turned to Caleb. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Is it over?" "It's over. We've got Voss, we've got his team, and we've got enough evidence to take down the entire organization. You did it, Mr. Hunter. You won." Caleb watched as paramedics loaded Voss onto a stretcher, the man who'd haunted his nightmares for a decade, who'd threatened his son, who'd tried to drag him back into a world of darkness. He looked small now, broken and bleeding, his power stripped away. It should have felt like victory. And it did, in a way. But mostly, Caleb just felt tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. "What happens now?" he asked. Torres joined them. "Now we process the arrests, secure the evidence, and begin building the case. You'll need to give a formal statement, probably several of them, and eventually you'll testify at trial. But for tonight, you should go home. Get some rest. Be with your son." "Jamie. God, Jamie." Caleb pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called Beth. "Hello?" "Beth. Hi, it's Caleb. Is Jamie still up?" "Actually, yes. The boys are watching a movie. Want me to put him on?" "Please." A moment later, his son's voice filled the line. "Dad, we're watching Star Wars. Can I stay one more night? Please?" Caleb felt tears he hadn't known were there slip down his cheeks. "Yeah, buddy, you can stay. Have fun. I'll pick you up tomorrow." "Okay, love you." "Love you too, more than you'll ever know." After he hung up, Evelyn put her hand on his shoulder. "It's really over." "Yeah," Caleb said softly. "It's really over." They stood together in the warehouse, surrounded by federal agents and evidence of violence. And for the first time in 10 years, Caleb Hunter felt something he'd almost forgotten. He felt free. The cleanup at the warehouse took until 3 in the morning. FBI evidence teams photographed every inch of the scene, collected shell casings, documented the positions of every person involved. Caleb gave his initial statement to 3 different agents, recounting the confrontation from multiple angles, describing Voss's movements, explaining why he'd fired those 3 shots that had changed everything. "You showed considerable restraint," Agent Torres said as they wrapped up the 4th hour of questioning. "Most people in that situation, with a weapon in hand and their enemy right there, they would have taken the shot, gone for center mass. You chose to create an opportunity instead." Caleb stared at his hands, remembering the weight of the pistol, the split-second decision. "I didn't want to kill him. I wanted him to face justice. There's a difference." "There is. And that difference matters, Mr. Hunter. It's the difference between revenge and righteousness, between becoming the thing you fought against and staying true to who you are. They let him leave around 4 a.m. Marcus drove him back to Montana in silence, the highway empty at that hour except for the occasional long-haul truck. Caleb dozed fitfully, his sleep plagued by fractured images, the flash of gunfire, Evelyn's terrified face, Voss's blood spreading across concrete. He woke as they pulled into his driveway, dawn light just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. His modest house looked exactly as he'd left it, but somehow different. Smaller, maybe. Or perhaps he was different, and the house had stayed the same. "Get some real sleep," Marcus said as Caleb climbed out of the SUV. "My team will maintain perimeter security for the next 72 hours, just to be safe. After that, the FBI will assess whether there's any residual threat from Aegis Associates." "You think there might be?" Voss was the head of the snake. With him in custody and the files exposed, most of his organization will scatter. But there's always the possibility of true believers, people loyal enough to want revenge. We'll stay vigilant until we're certain. Caleb nodded his thanks and trudged inside. He stripped off his clothes, leaving them in a pile on the bathroom floor, and stood under scalding water for 20 minutes, trying to wash away the residue of violence. But some stains went deeper than skin. He fell into bed without bothering to set an alarm and slept like the dead for 6 hours straight, the first dreamless sleep he'd had in weeks. The sound of his phone ringing yanked him back to consciousness. Caleb fumbled for it, squinting at the screen. Agent Hall. "Hello? Mr. Hunter, sorry to wake you, but we've had a development I thought you should know about immediately. Voss made it through surgery. He's conscious and he's talking." Caleb sat up, suddenly wide awake. Talking? About what? Everything. The moment he realized he was facing life in prison, maybe even the death penalty for threatening Ms. Cross, he started naming names. He's given us locations of Aegis facilities, identities of government officials who authorized illegal operations, financial records, offshore accounts. He's burning down the entire organization to save himself. That's good, right? That's what you wanted. It's better than good. It's extraordinary. With his testimony and your files, we're looking at indictments for at least 40 individuals, including 2 sitting senators, a retired general, and half a dozen State Department officials. This is going to be the biggest scandal in private military contracting since Blackwater. Hall paused. There's more. Voss specifically mentioned you. Caleb's stomach tightened. What did he say? He said you were the only operative who ever walked away from Aegis with a conscience intact. He said most of his people either became monsters or broke under the weight of what they'd done, but you managed to stay human. He called it your greatest strength and your most dangerous weakness. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult. Neither is he, I think, but it tells me something important about you, Mr. Hunter. It tells me you made the right choice 10 years ago when you took those files and ran. And you made the right choice this week when you decided to fight instead of hide. After Hall hung up, Caleb sat on the edge of his bed and tried to process the information. Voss was cooperating. The entire corrupt apparatus he'd helped build was being systematically dismantled. Justice, real justice, was finally coming for the people who'd operated in the shadows for so long. It should have felt satisfying, triumphant even. But mostly, Caleb just felt hollow. Because justice for the past didn't erase what had been done. It didn't bring back the people who died in those illegal operations. It didn't give him back the years he'd spent running, hiding, jumping at shadows. His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Evelyn Cross. "Ms. Cross?" "Evelyn, please. After last night, I think we're past formalities." Her voice was warm despite the early hour. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. How's your head? The temple, where Voss..." "Just a bruise. I've had worse injuries falling off a horse when I was 12. The doctors cleared me to fly home this morning." She paused. "I wanted to call because I have a proposition for you. Well, more than a proposition, an offer. I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't need money or... It's not money. Though God knows you deserve financial compensation for what you've been through. No, I'm offering you a job." Caleb blinked. "A job?" "Head of Personal Security for Cross Industries. You'd oversee my protection detail, coordinate with facility security teams, assess threat levels, manage risk. It's a position I've been meaning to fill for years, but I never found anyone I trusted enough. After this week, After seeing how you handle pressure and make decisions under fire, I can't think of anyone better qualified. I'm not qualified. I was a soldier and then a covert operative. I'm not a corporate security professional. You're exactly what I need. Someone who understands real threats, not just theoretical ones. Someone who knows how to protect people without turning their lives into prisons. Someone with integrity, who won't be corrupted by power or money. Evelyn's tone became more serious. Caleb, I'm going to be honest with you. The plane crash wasn't an accident. The NTSB found evidence of tampering with the fuel system. Someone tried to kill me and they nearly succeeded. I need security I can trust absolutely. You've already saved my life twice. I'd like to hire you to make sure there isn't a third time. The revelation about the crash being sabotage sent cold fingers down Caleb's spine. Have they identified who was responsible? Not yet, but the investigation is ongoing, and it's connected to some business rivals I've made over the years. People who see cross-industries as a threat to their own interests, which is why I need someone like you. Caleb walked to his window and looked out at the pine forest surrounding his property. He'd built a quiet life here, a safe life. The job Evelyn was offering would mean travel, exposure, returning to a world where threats were constant and vigilance was survival. But it would also mean purpose, security for his son, the ability to protect someone who'd already proven herself worth protecting, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to use his skills for something good instead of running from something bad. I have a son, he said finally. Jamie is my priority, always. Any job I take has to accommodate that. Of course. We'd relocate you to Seattle, set you up in a house near good schools, provide whatever support you need. Jamie would have access to the best education, the best health care, a trust fund for college, and your schedule would be flexible enough to attend his soccer games and school events. I have no interest in separating a father from his son, Caleb. I'm offering you a life, not just a job. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need, though I should mention the salary is $250,000 a year, plus benefits, housing allowance, and a signing bonus. I believe in compensating people appropriately for their skills and loyalty. After they said goodbye, Caleb set his phone down and rubbed his eyes. $250,000. That was more than he'd made in the last 5 years combined as a carpenter. It would change everything for Jamie. The schools he could attend, the opportunities he'd have, the security of knowing his father could provide for him without struggling. But it would also mean leaving this place. The quiet cabin, the lake where they fished, the small-town community that had accepted them without questions. Starting over, again, in a new city with new challenges. The decision would have to wait. Right now, he needed to pick up his son and start rebuilding their normal life, or whatever passed for normal after the week they'd just survived. Caleb showered, dressed, and drove to Beth's house. Jamie burst out the front door before Caleb even got the truck fully stopped. His face lit up with the uncomplicated joy of an 8-year-old who'd spent 3 days having the time of his life. Dad, we went to the lake and I caught a fish this big. Jamie held his hands apart in the universal gesture of exaggerated fish size. Well, maybe not that big. Not that. But it was still pretty big. And we roasted marshmallows and Tommy's dad told us ghost stories and I wasn't even scared. Caleb scooped his son into a hug, breathing in the smell of lake water and kid shampoo and innocence. Sounds like you had an amazing time. The best. Can I go back next weekend? We'll see. We've got some things to figure out first. Beth appeared on the porch, smiling. He was an absolute angel. You're welcome to leave him here any time. Thanks for taking such good care of him. I really appreciate it. Of course. Though I have to ask, I saw on the news that there was some kind of FBI operation in Seattle last night. Something about arrests related to a private military contractor. The reporter mentioned your name. Caleb's stomach sank. Of course the media had picked up the story. A shootout in a warehouse involving a billionaire CEO and the man who'd recently saved her life. That was exactly the kind of sensational story news outlets lived for. It's complicated, he said carefully, but it's over now. Everyone's safe. Beth studied him with the knowing look of someone who'd survived her own tragedies. If you need to talk, or if Jamie needs anything, you call me, okay? We look out for each other in this town. The drive home was filled with Jamie's chatter about his adventures. Caleb let the boy's words wash over him, asking questions at appropriate moments, laughing at the funny parts. But his mind was elsewhere. How much of the truth should he tell Jamie? How did you explain to an 8-year-old that his father's past had caught up with them, that dangerous men had threatened their lives, that everything was different now even if it looked the same? They were pulling into the driveway when Jamie finally ran out of stories and noticed the black SUV parked near the tree line, Marcus's security team still maintaining their watch. "Who are those people, Dad?" "Just some security guards. They're making sure our house is safe." "Safe from what?" "From anything bad. But don't worry about it, okay? They're the good guys." Jamie seemed satisfied with this explanation, his attention already shifting to more important matters like whether they could have pizza for dinner. That evening, after Jamie was fed and bathed and tucked into bed with his stuffed bear, Caleb sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Marcus appeared from the shadows like a ghost, moving with the silent grace of someone who'd spent decades in the field. "We're pulling out tomorrow morning," Marcus said without preamble. "FBI assessment is that with Voss in custody and his organization collapsing, there's minimal residual threat. You should be safe here." "Should be?" "Nothing's ever certain in this business, but the odds are good. Most of Aegis's people are scrambling to cover their own asses right now. Revenge isn't a priority when you're facing federal indictment." Marcus handed him a card. "My personal number. You need anything? Security concerns, advice, just someone to talk to who understands the life you came from. You call me, day or night. Thank you for everything. I know Evelyn hired you, but you went above and beyond. She's a good boss, best I've ever had. Takes care of her people, fights for what's right, doesn't ask anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself. If you're smart, you'll take the job she offered. You know about that? She asked my opinion before making the offer. I told her you'd be perfect for it. You've got the skills, the integrity, and most importantly, you understand that security isn't about building walls. It's about managing risks while still letting people live their lives. That's rare." After Marcus left, Caleb sat in the darkness and thought about futures. The safe option was to stay here, keep his head down, return to his carpentry work and his quiet existence. But safety was an illusion. This week had proven that. The past could always find you, no matter how well you buried it. The brave option was to accept Evelyn's offer, to step into a role where he could use his skills to protect someone who genuinely deserved protection, to give Jamie opportunities and security and a future brighter than anything Caleb could provide on a carpenter's salary. But bravery required trust. Trust that Evelyn's motives were genuine. Trust that Cross Industries wasn't just another organization that would use him and discard him. Trust that he could build something real in Seattle without the shadows of his past consuming him. His phone buzzed. A text from Agent Hall. "Need you at FBI field office tomorrow, 10 a.m. Formal deposition for Voss case. Bring lawyer if you want one." Another text followed immediately after, this one from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hunter, this is Robert Caldwell, attorney for Cross Industries. Ms. Cross asked me to reach out regarding legal representation for your upcoming FBI proceedings. I'd be happy to review any documents and accompany you to meetings. No charge. Consider it part of the employment offer." Caleb had to smile at that. Evelyn was nothing if not thorough. She was already taking care of him, already proving that her offer came with genuine support and resources. He typed a response to the lawyer. "Thank you. Yes, I'd appreciate representation. Can we meet tomorrow at 8 a.m. before the FBI appointment?" The reply came within seconds. "Absolutely. I'll send you my office address. See you then." The next morning, Caleb dropped Jamie at school, the boys' first day back after the extended absence. Mrs. Henderson met them at the entrance, her kind face creased with concern. "Everything okay now?" she asked quietly while Jamie ran ahead to greet his friends. "Getting there. Thank you for being patient with us." That's what community is for, Caleb. We support each other through the hard times. Robert Caldwell turned out to be a sharp-eyed man in his early 50s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades winning cases. His office in downtown Whitefish was modest but professional, decorated with diplomas from Yale Law School and photos of him shaking hands with various politicians and judges. "Ms. Cross briefed me on your situation," Caldwell said as they sat down. "I want to be clear about something up front. I'm here as your attorney, not hers. Everything you tell me is privileged. My loyalty is to you, not to Cross Industries." Evelyn insisted on that distinction. She didn't have to do that. She did, actually, because she understands that for you to trust her offer, you need to know you have independent representation. It's a smart move and an ethical one. Caldwell pulled out a legal pad. "Now, tell me everything about tomorrow's deposition. I want to know what questions they're likely to ask and how we should frame your responses." They spent 2 hours going over the details. Caldwell asked pointed questions, identified potential legal pitfalls, and outlined a strategy for Caleb's testimony that would satisfy the FBI's needs while protecting him from any potential liability for his actions during his Aegis years. "The key is the immunity agreement Agent Hall mentioned," Caldwell explained. "We need that in writing before you testify about anything operational. Once we have immunity, you can be completely forthcoming. But without it, we need to be more careful about certain details." The FBI field office in Missoula was a bland government building that could have been anywhere in America. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, that particular smell of old coffee and bureaucracy. Hall met them in the lobby and escorted them to a conference room where Torres and 2 other agents Caleb didn't recognize were waiting. The deposition lasted 6 hours. They took him through his entire history with Aegis, how he'd been recruited, what training he'd received, which operations he'd participated in. Caldwell interjected occasionally, clarifying questions or objecting to lines of inquiry that strayed too close to self-incrimination. But mostly, Caleb just told the truth. He described operations in Syria where they'd eliminated targets without proper authorization, missions in Yemen that had resulted in civilian casualties, arms deals in Somalia that had violated UN sanctions. He walked them through the organizational structure of Aegis, identified key players, explained how Voss had insulated the leadership from accountability, and he told them about the moment he'd realized he couldn't do it anymore. A mission in Afghanistan where they'd been ordered to eliminate a village elder suspected of harboring Taliban fighters. Caleb had done reconnaissance and discovered the man was actually helping the U.S. military identify insurgents. When he'd reported this to Voss, he'd been told to complete the mission anyway. The client wanted it done, and client wishes overrode ground truth. Caleb had refused. It was the first and only time he'd disobeyed a direct order. Voss had been furious, threatened him with consequences. That night, Caleb had started copying files, building his insurance policy, planning his escape. "I knew if I just left, they'd hunt me down," Caleb said. "So I took the files as leverage, insurance that as long as I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone. It worked for 10 years. Until the plane crash made you famous," Hall said. "Until the plane crash made me visible. There's a difference." By the time they finished, Caleb felt wrung out, exhausted from reliving memories he'd spent a decade trying to forget. But there was also a strange sense of relief. The secrets were out now. The burden was shared. He didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Torres slid a document across the table. "This is your immunity agreement. Everything you've told us today, everything you might testify to in future proceedings, you're protected from prosecution. The only exception would be if you lied to us, which I don't believe you have." Caldwell reviewed the document carefully, then nodded. "It's solid. I'd advise you to sign." Caleb signed, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. With that signature, he was committing himself to seeing this through, to testifying at trials, to facing cross-examination from defense attorneys, to reliving his past in public courtrooms. But he was also securing protection for Jamie. Whatever happened going forward, his son would be safe from the legal consequences of Caleb's past. Hall walked them out after the deposition concluded. In the parking lot, she stopped and turned to face Caleb directly. "I want you to know something," she said. "What you did this week, coming forward, setting the trap, testifying today, it takes courage. Most people in your position would have run or fought or tried to cut a deal that protected only themselves. You chose justice instead. That matters. I just want my son to grow up safe. He will. Thanks to you, dozens of corrupt officials and criminals are going to prison. Operations like Aegis will think twice before breaking the law again. You made a real difference, Mr. Hunter. Don't forget that. Driving back to Whitefish, Caleb felt lighter somehow. As if telling the truth, facing the past head on, had burned away some of the shame and fear he'd been carrying. It wasn't gone completely, maybe it never would be, but it was manageable now. That evening, he called Evelyn. "I'm accepting your offer," he said without preamble. "Head of security for Cross Industries, but I have some conditions." "Name them." "Jamie's safety is non-negotiable. If there's ever a choice between my job responsibilities and his well-being, he comes first. Always." "Agreed. Next?" "I want to be involved in the investigation into who sabotaged your plane. If someone tried to kill you once, they might try again. I need to understand the threat we're facing." "Already planned on it. My head of corporate investigations is compiling a file. You'll have full access. And I want your promise that if I tell you something is a security risk, you'll listen. No overruling me because it's inconvenient or because you don't like the restrictions. If I say no to something, it's for a good reason." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be difficult for me. I'm used to being in control, making my own decisions." "I know, but I can't protect you effectively if you ignore my advice. We need to trust each other." "All right. You have my word. I'll listen to your security recommendations and take them seriously, but I reserve the right to discuss them if I think there's a better solution." "Fair enough. When can you start?" Caleb looked around his small cabin at the life he'd built in Montana. Leaving it would be hard, but staying would be harder now that the illusion of safety had been stripped away. "Give me 2 weeks. I need to sell the house, get Jamie enrolled in a Seattle school, pack up our lives here. 2 weeks, and we'll be ready. Take 3 if you need it. I want this transition to be smooth for both of you. I'll have my HR director reach out about housing options in Seattle. We own several properties that might work for you." After hanging up, Caleb walked into Jamie's room. The boy was already asleep, one arm flung over his stuffed bear, his face peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and gently brushed hair from his son's forehead. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "I promise. We're going to have a good life, you and me. A safe life. A real life." Jamie stirred slightly but didn't wake. Caleb sat there for a long time watching his son sleep, thinking about futures and second chances and the way lives could change in an instant, sometimes for the worse, but sometimes, if you were lucky and brave and willing to fight for it, for the better. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of logistics. Caleb put the cabin on the market and was amazed when it sold in 4 days to a young couple from California looking for a quiet retreat. He packed up 10 years of accumulated possessions, threw away things that didn't matter anymore, kept the things that did, photos of Sarah, Jamie's artwork from kindergarten, the fishing rod they'd been using the day of the crash. He met with Hall 3 more times for additional depositions as the federal case against Aegis expanded. Each session revealed new depths of corruption, new co-conspirators, new crimes that would take years to fully prosecute. But the case was solid. Voss's testimony combined with Caleb's files created an ironclad narrative of systematic illegality. The media attention gradually faded. There were always new stories, new tragedies, new heroes to celebrate. Within 2 weeks, Caleb's face was mostly forgotten by the general public. He was relieved. Jamie took the news of their move with the adaptability of children. He was sad to leave his friends, but excited about living in a big city, about the new house with the big backyard that Evelyn's HR director had found for them, about the school that had a robotics program and a real swimming pool. "Will I still be able to see you every day?" Jamie asked one evening as they packed boxes together. "Every day," Caleb promised. "I'll still take you to school and pick you up. We'll still have dinner together and do homework. The only difference is I'll have a different job and we'll live in a different place. And you'll keep people safe, like you kept that lady safe from the plane." "Something like that." "Cool. That's way better than building decks." On their last morning in Montana, Caleb took Jamie fishing one final time at Clearwater Lake. They stood on the same rocky shore where everything had changed, casting lines into water that looked exactly as it had that fateful Tuesday morning 2 weeks ago. "Did you know," Jamie said thoughtfully, "that this is where you became a hero?" "I'm not a hero, buddy. I just did what anyone should do." "That's what heroes say." Jamie's bobber dipped beneath the surface. "I got one! Dad, I got one!" They spent the next 20 minutes reeling in a decent-sized trout, Jamie's face lit with triumph as Caleb helped him land it. They took a picture together, father and son holding the fish between them, smiling at the camera. Then they released it back into the lake and watched it disappear into the depths. "Why'd we let it go?" Jamie asked. "Because it deserves to be free, just like us." The drive to Seattle took most of the day. Caleb had arranged for a moving company to transport their furniture and boxes, so the truck was light, carrying just the essentials and whatever Jamie insisted on having for the journey. They listened to audiobooks, stopped for lunch at a diner that reminded Caleb of Maggie's place, and talked about what their new life might look like. They arrived at their new house just as the sun was setting, painting the Seattle skyline in shades of orange and purple. The house was in a quiet neighborhood in Queen Anne, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a fenced yard and a view of Puget Sound in the distance. It was bigger than the cabin, nicer, with updated appliances and hardwood floors and crown molding. Evelyn had left a welcome basket on the kitchen counter, gourmet snacks, fresh flowers, a handwritten note that said simply, "Welcome home. Looking forward to working with you. E." "This is awesome." Jamie ran through the house, exploring rooms and claiming the biggest bedroom as his own. "Dad, there's even a finished basement. Can that be our game room?" "Sure, buddy. Whatever you want." That night, after Jamie was asleep in his new room, Caleb stood on the back porch and looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Seattle felt foreign, overwhelming, full of possibilities and dangers he couldn't yet identify. But it also felt like a fresh start, a chance to build something new from the ashes of what he'd lost. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Heard you made it to Seattle. Welcome to the neighborhood. Team briefing tomorrow at HQ, 9 a.m. Don't be late." Another text, this one from Hall. "Voss arraignment set for next week. You'll need to be available to testify if called. Thanks again for everything." And finally, one from Evelyn. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we start changing the world, or at least keeping it a little bit safer. Glad you're here." Caleb smiled and pocketed his phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new fears to manage and overcome. But tonight, he was just a father who'd moved his son to a new city, who'd taken a job that would provide for them, who'd chosen courage over comfort. He went inside, locked the doors, set the alarm system that Cross Industries Security had installed earlier that day, and checked on Jamie one more time. The boy was sprawled across his new bed, already making it his own, completely at peace in this strange place, because his father was there and that was all that mattered. Caleb stood in the doorway watching his son sleep, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel like he was running from something. He felt like he was running toward something, toward justice, toward purpose, toward a life that mattered. The past was behind him now, not forgotten. It would never be forgotten, but no longer in control. The future was uncertain, full of challenges he couldn't yet see, but he'd face them with allies beside him, with skills honed by experience, and with the most important reason in the world to keep fighting. His son was safe. That was what mattered. Everything else was just details. Caleb turned off the lights and went to bed in his new house in his new city, carrying with him the weight of what had been and the hope of what might be. Tomorrow would bring the next chapter of his story. But tonight, he could rest. The war was over, the battle was won, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb Hunter felt something that had eluded him for a decade. He felt peace. The alarm went off at 6:30, pulling Caleb from a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of rest he hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, he lay disoriented in the unfamiliar bedroom, the morning light filtering through curtains he didn't recognize, until memory caught up with him. Seattle. New house. New life. He dressed in the clothes Marcus had specified. Dark slacks, button-down shirt, blazer that concealed the shoulder holster he'd been issued yesterday. The weight of the weapon felt both foreign and familiar, like slipping into an old skin he'd tried to shed but never quite could. Jamie was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, his school backpack ready by the door. The kid had always been an early riser, a trait he'd inherited from Sarah. "Big day, Dad," Jamie said through a mouthful of cornflakes. "Your first day at the new job." "Big day for you too. New school, new teachers, new friends to make." I'm not nervous. Jamie lifted his chin with 8-year-old bravado. I'm excited. Caleb smiled and ruffled his son's hair. That's my boy. Come on, let's get you to school. I don't want to be late for my first briefing. The drive to Jamie's new school took 15 minutes through morning traffic. Laurelhurst Elementary was a modern building with bright murals painted on the walls and a playground that looked like it had been designed by someone who actually remembered being a child. Caleb walked Jamie to the front office, signed the necessary forms, and watched a friendly teacher named Ms. Rodriguez lead his son down the hallway toward his new classroom. Jamie turned back once, gave him a thumbs up, and disappeared around the corner. Caleb felt his chest tighten with the familiar anxiety of letting his son out of his sight, but he forced himself to breathe through it. This was normal. This was what regular parents did every day. Jamie was safe here. Cross Industries headquarters occupied a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Seattle, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Caleb parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the 35th floor, where the Security Operations Center was located. The doors opened onto a space that looked like something from a spy movie. Multiple monitors displaying feeds from hundreds of cameras, sophisticated computer systems, a conference room with touchscreen displays covering the walls. Marcus was waiting for him, along with 4 other people Caleb didn't recognize. They were gathered around a large table covered with documents, tablets, and coffee cups. Caleb, good morning. Let me introduce the team. Marcus gestured to each person in turn. This is Sarah Chen, my sister and head of cybersecurity. David Park, Facilities Security Manager, Jennifer Rodriguez, Executive Protection Coordinator, and Thomas Okafor, Intelligence Analyst. Everyone, this is Caleb Hunter, our new Director of Personal Security. They shook hands around the table, professional but cautiously welcoming. Caleb knew they were assessing him, wondering if he was qualified for the position or just someone who'd gotten the job through personal connection to the boss. Let's get down to business, Marcus said, pulling up a presentation on the main screen. Caleb, you asked to be briefed on the investigation into Ms. Cross's plane crash. Here's what we know so far. The next hour was an intensive crash course in corporate espionage and attempted murder. The sabotage had been sophisticated, a slow-acting corrosive agent applied to a critical fuel line component that would degrade over time and fail catastrophically during flight. The timing had been carefully calculated to ensure the crash would occur over remote terrain where rescue would be difficult. The NTSB traced the chemical compound to a manufacturer in Eastern Europe, Thomas said, his Nigerian accent crisp and precise. It's not commercially available, which means whoever ordered this had serious resources and connections. We've been investigating Ms. Cross's business rivals, looking for anyone with both motive and capability. Have you found anyone? Caleb asked. 3 candidates. Sarah pulled up photos on the screen. Gregory Hartman, CEO of Techdyne Industries. They lost a major defense contract to us 6 months ago, cost them about $2 billion. Hartman has a history of aggressive business tactics, and his company has ties to private security firms that could access the chemical compound used in the sabotage. Second candidate is Martin Zhao, Chinese national with significant holdings in pharmaceutical manufacturing. Cross Industries blocked his attempted hostile takeover of Biomedics last year, so his connections to intelligence services and unlimited financial resources. And third is Richard Castellano, former business partner of Ms. Cross from her early days building the company. They had a bitter falling out 15 years ago over intellectual property disputes. Castellano sued, lost, and swore revenge. He's made several public threats against Ms. Cross over the years, though nothing specific enough to warrant legal action. Caleb studied the 3 faces on the screen, his tactical mind already analyzing threat profiles. Which one has the highest probability? We think it's Zhao, Marcus said. His resources match the sophistication of the attack. He has clear financial motive, and our intelligence suggests he's used similar tactics against competitors in the past, but we can't rule out the others. What's the security posture right now? How are we protecting Ms. Cross? Jennifer Rodriguez spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in executive protection. Enhanced protocols since the crash. Ms. Cross has a 4-person protection detail anytime she leaves the building. 2 advance, 2 close protection. We've swept her home for surveillance devices, installed upgraded security systems, and we're vetting all new personnel who come into contact with her. Her vehicle is armored, and we vary her routes and schedule to prevent pattern recognition. It's not enough, Caleb said bluntly. If Zhao or any of these others are serious about trying again, they'll adapt to your protocols. You need to be more unpredictable, and you need to go on offense, not just defense. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? We set a trap, similar to what we did with Voss, but subtler. We create an opportunity that looks too good to pass up, a moment of vulnerability in Ms. Cross's schedule, a gap in security that seems exploitable. Then we watch to see who takes the bait. That's risky, Jennifer said. You're talking about using Ms. Cross as bait. I'm talking about controlling the situation instead of reacting to it. Right now, we're waiting for them to make a move. That gives them all the advantages. We choose when and where to create the opening, we control every variable, and we have overwhelming response ready when they take the shot. Sarah was nodding slowly. It's not a bad plan, actually. We could stage a scenario where Ms. Cross appears to be traveling with minimal security. A business trip, maybe. Somewhere outside Seattle, where our usual protocols might seem relaxed. We leak the information through channels we know are compromised, then watch to see who moves on it. And if nobody takes the bait? David asked. Then we try again with a different approach. But my gut says whoever tried to kill her once isn't going to stop. They'll be watching for an opportunity. Let's give them one on our terms. The team spent the next 2 hours wargaming scenarios and protocols. Caleb was impressed by their professionalism and experience. These weren't corporate security guards playing dress-up. They were former military, former intelligence, people who'd spent careers in the real world of threats and violence. Around 11, Evelyn walked into the operations center. She moved with confidence despite the fading bruises still visible on her face, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected power and control. I thought I'd find you all here conspiring, she said with a slight smile. How's the first day going, Caleb? Good. Your team is excellent. We're developing a strategy for the threat assessment. So I heard. Evelyn pulled out a chair and sat down. Marcus briefed me on your trap idea. It's bold, possibly reckless, but I like it. Ms. Cross, with respect, using yourself as bait is exactly the kind of decision I was talking about when I said you need to trust my security recommendations, Caleb said carefully. This is dangerous. Life is dangerous. Flying in planes is dangerous, as I recently learned. But I'm not going to hide in a bunker while someone out there is planning their next attempt. If we can draw them out and neutralize the threat permanently, that's worth some calculated risk. The risk would be very calculated, Marcus assured her. We'd stage this in a controlled environment with extensive backup and contingencies. You'd never be in actual danger. Evelyn looked at Caleb directly, her brown eyes serious. Do you trust your team to keep me safe? I'm still learning who they are, but based on what I've seen this morning, yes, they're good. Then let's do it. Draw up a detailed plan and we'll review it together. I want to understand every step, every contingency, every possible point of failure. And Caleb, thank you for caring about my safety enough to argue with me about it. That's exactly why I hired you. After she left, the team returned to planning with renewed energy. They settled on a scenario set for 2 weeks out, a business trip to San Francisco for a technology conference. Evelyn would travel with what appeared to be minimal security, staying at a hotel that her company had used before, following a schedule that would be leaked to suspected compromised channels. In reality, the entire operation would be locked down tighter than a presidential visit. Undercover agents in the hotel, surveillance on every approach, a tactical response team on standby. If anyone took the bait, they'd walk into a situation they couldn't escape. The rest of Caleb's first day was spent learning systems, meeting staff, and beginning to understand the scope of his responsibilities. Cross Industries had facilities in 23 countries, employed over 40,000 people, and dealt with security threats ranging from industrial espionage to physical attacks on overseas personnel. The job was enormous, complex, and frankly intimidating, but it was also important, real, something that mattered. He picked Jamie up from school at 3:30, his son bursting with stories about his new teacher, the kids he'd met, the robotics lab they'd visited. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, and Caleb felt some of his own anxiety about the new life they were building begin to ease. That evening, after dinner and homework and the bedtime routine, Caleb received a call from Agent Hall. "How's Seattle treating you?" she asked. "Good so far?" First day on the new job went well. Glad to hear it. I'm calling because the Voss case has developed faster than expected. He's been so cooperative that the prosecutors want to move quickly before he changes his mind. The first round of indictments will be handed down next week. Preliminary hearings start in 30 days. That's fast. That's justice when you have overwhelming evidence and a cooperative witness. You'll need to testify at several of the hearings. I know you're trying to build a new life in Seattle, but this is going to require you to be available for the next 6 months at least, possibly longer. Caleb had known this was coming, but the reality of it still felt heavy. I'll make it work. This is too important not to see through. I appreciate that. There's something else you should know. The Congressional Oversight Committee wants to hold public hearings on Aegis and private military contractors in general. They've specifically requested you as a witness. It would be televised, national coverage, very high profile. I thought I was done being famous. Hall laughed softly. Sorry. When you take down a corrupt organization that's been operating for decades, people want to hear the story. You don't have to testify if you don't want to. It's voluntary, not a subpoena. But your testimony could lead to real legislative reform, new laws governing private contractors, better oversight, accountability measures that could prevent another Aegis from emerging. Caleb thought about it. More media attention was the last thing he wanted. But if his testimony could prevent other young soldiers from being recruited into organizations that would use them for illegal operations, if it could save other people from the moral weight he'd carried for years, wasn't that worth the discomfort? Okay, he said, finally. I'll do it. When? Probably 3 months from now. I'll keep you updated on the schedule. After hanging up, Caleb sat on his back porch and watched the city lights, thinking about the strange path his life had taken. A month ago, he'd been an anonymous carpenter in Montana, focused only on survival and protecting his son. Now he was the head of security for a Fortune 500 company, preparing to testify before Congress, helping to dismantle a corrupt organization that had operated in the shadows for decades. It was surreal, overwhelming, but also right. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. Dinner tomorrow night? My place. I promise to cook something that won't poison us. Would love for you to bring Jamie. My nephew is visiting and he's about the same age. Caleb smiled and typed back. Sounds good. What time? 6. And Caleb? Thank you for today. For pushing back on the trap idea, for caring about the risks, for taking this role seriously. I made the right choice hiring you. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Caleb would drop Jamie at school, spend the day at Cross Industries coordinating security operations, and pick his son up in the afternoon. Evenings were for homework and dinner and the comfortable routines of family life. Weekends were for exploring Seattle, taking Jamie to the Space Needle, the aquarium, Pike Place Market. They had dinner at Evelyn's penthouse that second Friday, and Jamie hit it off immediately with her nephew Marcus, confusingly sharing a name with Marcus Chen, but the boy insisted on being called Mark to avoid mix-ups. The two kids disappeared into Mark's room to play video games while the adults talked over wine and pasta that Evelyn had indeed cooked without poisoning anyone. How are you settling in? She asked as they sat on her balcony overlooking the Sound. Better than expected. Your team is excellent, and the work is challenging in a good way. I feel like I'm doing something that matters. You are. More than you know. Evelyn took a sip of wine. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Do you ever regret it, pulling me from that plane? Your life was quiet before that day, safe, anonymous. Now you're testifying at trials, working a high-profile job, dealing with threats and responsibilities. Part of me feels guilty for disrupting the peace you'd built. Caleb thought about how to answer. I don't regret saving you. I couldn't live with myself if I'd stood on that shore and watched you drown. But you're right that it changed everything. My past caught up with me, and there's no going back to the anonymous life I had before. But maybe that life was an illusion anyway. I was hiding, not living. I was so focused on keeping Jamie safe that I forgot to show him what it means to be brave, to stand for something, to use your skills and experiences to make the world better. This new life, it's scary and complicated and sometimes overwhelming. But it's real. And I'd rather live a real life with risks than a false one built on hiding from my past. Evelyn smiled, something warm and genuine. That's a good answer. And for what it's worth, I think you're showing Jamie exactly what he needs to see. A father who does the right thing even when it's hard. Who protects people who need protection. Who faces his past instead of running from it. That's a hell of an example to set. Inside, they could hear the boys laughing over their video game, the sound of innocent joy that both adults treasured. Caleb raised his wine glass. To second chances. Evelyn clinked her glass against his. To the people who give them to us. The San Francisco operation was scheduled for a Thursday in late September. The planning had been meticulous, every detail mapped out, every contingency covered, every member of the team briefed on their exact role. Caleb had reviewed the plan so many times he could recite it in his sleep. They leaked Evelyn's travel schedule through 3 different channels they suspected were compromised. Then they waited to see if anyone would bite. On the Tuesday before the trip, Thomas Okafor burst into Caleb's office with his laptop. We've got activity. Someone accessed Ms. Cross's schedule through a vulnerability we left open in our third-party vendor portal. The access was routed through several proxies, but we were able to trace it back to a shell company that has ties to Martin Zhao. Caleb felt his pulse quicken. You're sure? As sure as we can be without direct proof, but the pattern matches Zhao's previous operations. He's taking the bait. They mobilized the full security apparatus. FBI agents were brought in to coordinate with local San Francisco law enforcement. The hotel where Evelyn would be staying was swept and secured, with agents planted throughout the building. Surveillance teams set up on every approach route. A tactical response unit was positioned 2 minutes away. Thursday morning, Caleb accompanied Evelyn on the flight to San Francisco. She had insisted on only 2 visible security personnel, himself and Jennifer Rodriguez, to maintain the illusion of reduced protection. But Marcus and 6 others were on the same flight, dressed as business travelers, and another 12 team members were already in position in San Francisco. The conference was being held at a convention center downtown. Evelyn gave her keynote speech at 2 p.m., discussing the future of technology and corporate responsibility. Caleb stood at the side of the stage, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, his earpiece feeding him updates from the surveillance teams positioned throughout the building. Clear on all sectors, Sarah's voice came through. No suspicious activity detected. Maybe they'd been wrong. Maybe Zhao wasn't going to make a move, or maybe he'd seen through the trap somehow. Then, at 4:15, as Evelyn was leaving the convention center through a side entrance, Thomas's voice crackled urgently through the earpiece. We have positive identification on a Zhao associate. Male, Asian, mid-30s, approaching from the east. He's carrying what appears to be a small device. Caleb's hand moved to his weapon, but he kept his body language relaxed. They needed to see what the associate would do, needed enough evidence to make charges stick. I see him, Marcus said calmly. He's moving parallel to Ms. Cross's vehicle path. Could be positioning for a vehicle attack. The associate stopped near a parked car, began working on something underneath the chassis. A bomb. He was planting a bomb on what he thought was Evelyn's vehicle. But Cross Industries had switched cars at the last minute, a precaution Caleb had insisted on. The vehicle the man was sabotaging was empty and under full surveillance. Let him finish, Caleb ordered quietly. We need him completing the action for attempted murder charges. They waited, hearts pounding, as the man attached the device and walked quickly away. The moment he was clear, FBI tactical teams swarmed from 3 directions, weapons drawn, voices commanding compliance. The associate tried to run but was tackled and cuffed within seconds. Bomb disposal experts immediately secured the device, a sophisticated explosive that would have detonated when the vehicle started. We've got him, Agent Hall's voice came through. And we've got enough for multiple felony charges. Good work, everyone. But Caleb wasn't satisfied. This is just a foot soldier. We need to tie this directly to Zhao. Already working on it, Thomas said. We're executing search warrants on the associate's phone and computer. If there's communication with Zhao, we'll find it. They did. Within 6 hours, forensic analysis of the associate's devices revealed encrypted communications with an account traced directly to Martin Zhao. Messages discussing timing, payment, and explicit instructions about targeting Evelyn Cross. By Friday morning, federal agents had arrested Zhao at his estate in Los Angeles. The charges included attempted murder, conspiracy, and domestic terrorism. The evidence was overwhelming. Caleb stood in Evelyn's hotel room that evening, both of them watching the news coverage of Zhao's arrest. The reporter was calling it the biggest corporate espionage case in decades, with potential connections to multiple other attacks on business leaders. "It's over," Evelyn said quietly. "Really over. The threat is neutralized. For now, there might be others. But we'll handle them, together, with your paranoid, brilliant security planning and my stubborn insistence on living my life fully despite the risks." She turned to face him. "Thank you, Caleb. For everything. For saving my life twice now. Once from drowning and once from a bomb. For taking this job seriously. For caring about keeping me safe. It's what you hired me for. It's more than that. You could have phoned this in, treated it as a cushy corporate gig, and collected a paycheck. Instead, you threw yourself into it completely. You rebuilt your life to do this work, and you've made a real difference. Not just for me, but for everyone at Cross Industries who's safer because of the systems you're putting in place." They flew back to Seattle the next morning. Caleb picked up Jamie from the neighbor who'd been watching him, and they spent the weekend doing normal father-son things, visiting the park, watching movies, making pancakes for breakfast. The following Tuesday, Caleb testified before Congress. The hearing was everything Hall had warned him about: cameras, senators asking loaded questions, media frenzy. But Caleb spoke calmly and clearly about his experiences with Aegis, about the lack of oversight that had allowed illegal operations to flourish, about the need for reform. His testimony made national news. But this time, the attention felt different. He wasn't famous for a moment of heroism, but for standing up for something important, for helping to create change that would protect others. The congressional hearing led directly to the Private Military Contractor Accountability Act, bipartisan legislation that established strict oversight requirements, mandatory reporting of operations, and criminal penalties for violations. It passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming support and was signed into law by the president 4 months later. Caleb was invited to the signing ceremony. He stood in the Oval Office with lawmakers and advocacy groups, watching the president put his signature on legislation that would prevent future abuses. It was surreal and humbling and deeply satisfying. The trials for Voss and his associates stretched over the next year. Caleb testified at 7 different proceedings, each time reliving his past, but also seeing justice done. Voss received a 40-year sentence for conspiracy, racketeering, and multiple counts of ordering illegal assassinations. His top lieutenants got similar terms. Dozens of government officials were convicted of corruption. Aegis Group was formally dissolved, its assets seized, its operations shut down permanently. Through it all, life continued. Jamie thrived at his new school, making friends and joining the robotics club. Caleb attended every parent-teacher conference, every school event, every science fair. He was present for his son in a way he'd never quite managed before, no longer consumed by fear and secrets. His relationship with Evelyn evolved into genuine friendship. They had dinner regularly, talked about everything from security protocols to philosophy, to their shared experience of building lives from difficult pasts. She became part of their family in a way that felt natural and right. Marcus and the security team became trusted colleagues and friends. They worked together to make Cross Industries one of the most secure corporations in America, implementing innovative protocols that other companies began to emulate. 18 months after the plane crash, Caleb stood on the shore of a lake in Vermont, not hiding this time, but visiting. The FBI had finally closed his case file. There were no more threats from Aegis, no more trials pending, no more need for the witness protection that had been offered. He was simply Caleb Hunter, head of security for Cross Industries, single father, survivor. He'd brought Jamie here for a weekend getaway, wanting to show his son that lakes could be peaceful places for fishing and fun, not just sites of trauma and transformation. They'd spent the day on the water, and Jamie had caught 3 decent-sized bass, his face lit with joy each time. That evening, after Jamie was asleep in their cabin, Caleb sat on the porch with a beer and his phone. He scrolled through messages from his new life, a text from Marcus about next week's schedule, an email from Hall updating him on appeals in the Aegis cases, a photo from Evelyn of her at a charity gala with the caption, "Boring without you here to analyze security protocols." His phone rang. Evelyn, as if summoned by his thoughts. "Hey," he answered. "How's the gala?" "Tedious. I've made my appearance, given my speech, and now I'm hiding in a side room pretending to take an important call. How's Vermont?" "Beautiful. Peaceful. Jamie caught 3 fish today." "That's wonderful. Listen, I'm calling because I wanted to run something by you. I'm planning to establish a foundation, the Cross Foundation for Corporate Accountability. It would focus on transparency in business, support whistleblowers, fund investigations into corporate wrongdoing. I want it to be a legacy that matters, not just a tax write-off." "That sounds like exactly the kind of thing you should do." "I'd like you to be on the board of directors. Your experience, your integrity, you'd bring exactly the perspective we need, and it would only require a few hours a month, nothing that would interfere with your current role or your time with Jamie." Caleb thought about it. A foundation that helped people stand up to corrupt organizations, that supported those who chose justice over complicity. It was meaningful work, important work. "I'd be honored." "Excellent. We'll discuss details when you're back, but Caleb, thank you. For saying yes, for being part of this journey, for becoming someone I can trust completely. That's rare in my world." After they hung up, Caleb sat in the darkness and thought about the journey that had brought him here. The plane crash that had exposed him, the confrontation with Voss that had freed him, the choice to stop hiding and start living. He thought about Sarah, who he'd never forget but who no longer haunted him with guilt and grief. She'd wanted him to be happy, to give Jamie a good life. He was doing that now. He thought about the men and women whose testimonies had helped bring down Aegis, the other operatives who'd found the courage to come forward after Caleb had shown it was possible. They'd all been trapped by fear and secrets. Now they were free. And he thought about Jamie, sleeping peacefully in the cabin behind him. His son would grow up knowing his father as a man who'd made mistakes but had the courage to make them right. A man who protected others, who stood for justice, who'd built something good from the ruins of something bad. That was the legacy that mattered. Not heroism in a single moment, but integrity in 1,000 small choices. The next morning, Caleb and Jamie packed up their fishing gear and headed home to Seattle. The drive was long but comfortable, full of Jamie's chatter about school projects and weekend plans and whether they could get a dog. "A dog?" Caleb said. "That's a big responsibility." "I'm responsible. I do my homework and clean my room, and I'm 9 now, Dad. That's basically a grown-up." Caleb laughed. "We'll think about it. Maybe visit a shelter, see what's available." They arrived home late Sunday evening. The house was dark and quiet, but it felt welcoming in a way the Montana cabin never quite had. This was home now. Real home, built on truth instead of secrets. Monday morning brought another school drop-off, another day at Cross Industries headquarters, another round of meetings and security briefings, and the satisfying work of protecting people who needed protection. Evelyn stopped by his office around noon with coffee and pastries. "How was Vermont?" "Good. Restful. Jamie wants a dog now." "Every kid wants a dog. Get him a dog. Life's too short not to have a dog if you want one." She sat down across from his desk. "I have news. Martin Zhao pleaded guilty to all charges. He's facing 30 years, and part of his plea deal includes testifying about other corporate espionage operations. Your trap didn't just protect me, it's opening up investigations into a whole network of criminal activity." "That's good, really good." "It is, and it's because of you, because you had the courage to propose the plan, the skills to execute it, and the integrity to see it through properly." Evelyn paused, her expression becoming more serious. "I want you to know something. When I was in that plane drowning, I wasn't thinking about my company or my wealth or my accomplishments. I was thinking about all the things I'd never done, all the ways I'd let fear or caution or ambition prevent me from really living. You gave me a second chance at life, and I've tried to make it count. To be better, to do more, to matter in ways that extend beyond profit margins. You do matter, you always did. Maybe, but I'm more intentional about it now. And that's a gift you gave me twice. Once, by pulling me from the water, and once by showing me what it looks like to be brave enough to face your past and build something better from it. After she left, Caleb sat at his desk and looked out at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in this city, Jamie was in his classroom learning about science or history or whatever third graders studied. Marcus and the security team were monitoring threats and coordinating protection. Hall and her FBI colleagues were prosecuting more cases stemming from the Aegis investigation. The world kept turning, full of dangers and challenges, and the constant need for people willing to stand against corruption and violence. But it was also full of second chances, redemption arcs, lives rebuilt from ashes. Caleb opened his laptop and began reviewing security protocols for an upcoming international trip Evelyn had planned. The work was detailed and demanding, requiring constant vigilance and creative thinking. But it was honest work, important work, work that mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Jamie's teacher. Jamie gave an excellent presentation today about his father's work protecting people. He's very proud of you. Thought you should know. Caleb smiled and saved the message. That was all he needed. His son, proud of him. Not for being perfect, but for being real. For facing hard things and coming through them with integrity intact. That evening, they did visit a shelter. Jamie fell in love with a golden retriever mix named Copper, and Caleb found himself agreeing to adoption papers before he'd quite made a conscious decision. They brought the dog home, and Jamie spent the whole evening playing with him in the backyard, his laughter ringing out in the gathering dusk. Caleb stood at the window watching, a beer in his hand, peace in his heart. The war really was over. The battles had been won, and the life he'd earned through courage and sacrifice and refusing to stay buried in shame, it was good. His phone rang one more time that night, a number he didn't recognize, which usually meant either a telemarketer or something important. He answered. "Mr. Hunter, this is Daniel Park from the FBI. I work in the Behavioral Analysis Unit. Agent Hall gave me your number. I'm calling because we've noticed a pattern in several cold cases that matches methods used by Aegis operatives. We're hoping you might be willing to consult on some investigations, help us understand tactical approaches and organizational structure. It would be voluntary, and we'd work around your schedule." Caleb thought about it. More FBI work, more diving into the darkness of what Aegis had done. It would be difficult, emotionally exhausting, potentially triggering for trauma he'd worked hard to process. But it would also bring closure to families who'd lost loved ones. Justice for victims who'd never known why they were targeted. Accountability for crimes that had gone unpunished for too long. "Yes," Caleb said. "I'll help. Send me the case files and we'll set up a meeting." After hanging up, he walked outside and sat on the back porch steps. Copper immediately bounded over, tail wagging, and collapsed at his feet with a contented sigh. From inside, he could hear Jamie getting ready for bed, singing off-key to himself the way he always did. The night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. A plane flew overhead, its lights blinking red and green as it descended toward SeaTac Airport. Caleb watched it pass and felt no fear. No flashback to the crash that had changed everything. Just gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. For the courage to save a stranger. For the strength to face his past. For the wisdom to choose justice over safety. And for the life he'd earned, messy and complicated and real. Full of love and purpose, and the daily choice to be better than he'd been before. Caleb Hunter was no longer running from his past. He was walking confidently into his future. And that future was bright. The peace, at last, was his to keep.